Chapter 1519. Demonic Sect Mountain Gate. The Night Demon Sect Master had a gloomy expression. He ordered all the demonic sect cultivators that tried to comfort him to retreat. He returned to his dwelling and opened a secret door. Then he went down the crack and entered a cultivation chamber. His gloomy face was like snow under the blazing sun, quickly melting away. His face flushed red with excitement. He walked to a corner of the chamber and rapidly formed seals with his fingers. Soon, in an empty area, space wriggled and a small memorial tablet appeared. Faint traces of fog lingered on it, covering the words on the surface so that they were unreal. The Night Demon Sect Master knelt down and respectfully kowtowed. "Master, the Mist seems to have seen the chance to take revenge for you. She left the sect and followed this person. But please rest assured that I will do everything in my power to ensure the Mist's safety." The fog that lingered on the surface of the tablet began to gently float. Wisps of Tao aura were emitted from it, which slowly floated in the chamber deep underground. The Night Demon Sect Master respectfully bowed to the ground. After a long time, when everything calmed down, he stood up and formed seals. Space wriggled and swallowed the tablet. After the demonic sect incident, the army didn't linger. They raced towards the western border camp. Qin Yu secretly observed Ruru for several days. She was well behaved and didn't try to do anything. This allowed him to feel a little more at ease. Of course, it was only a little more. He wouldn't be careless. Qin Yu retracted some of his energy and began to study the seal he had obtained from the military before leaving the imperial capital. This was a square seal that was 2 fingers wide and had the words Golden General engraved on it. This was proof of his identity. But soon, Qin Yu discovered that this thing wasn't so simple. As mentioned before, it was related to the Western Desolation and the Divine Kingdom. The massive Western Desolation Empire was a massive divine kingdom. All the cultivators ruled by the emperor races were a part of this divine kingdom. Simply put, they were the believers of the divine kingdom. And the function of the divine kingdom was to collect faith. It could also be called incense. Qin Yu himself had a divine kingdom and could constantly receive a weak power of incense from the distant divine kingdom. He wasn't unfamiliar with this. Thus, he discovered the secret of the seal. It was a joss flame treasure. That's right, in Qin Yu's perception. This seal could automatically absorb incense. A small portion of them would slowly fuse into his body, but most of them would vanish into thin air after accumulating a certain amount of praise. After thinking about it for a long time, Qin Yu began to understand. The function of the seal in his hand should be that of a transit station for the power of joss flames. In other words, it could absorb a portion of the joss flames within the borders of the great Western Frontier Empire and then transfer and use them. Compared to his own elementary level divine kingdom, the power of joss flames in this seal left his heart racing. The power of joss flames was of great help to cultivation and could strengthen one's divine kingdom. Perhaps he could try to intercept some of the joss flame collected by the seal in his hand. Of course, there were risks, but if they succeeded, the rewards would be astonishing. Within his room, Qin Yu played with the seal in his hands. At this time, he could see countless runes carved into the surface of the seal. It was these runes that interweaved with each other and formed a strange force field that served as a transfer station for joss flames. If he wanted to take a share of the loot, he would have to change this force field. Moreover, he had to do it in secret without revealing the slightest flaw. Everything Qin Yu knew about the divine kingdom came from the chicken overlord. Thinking for a moment, he reached out and snapped his fingers. Soon, with a flapping sound, the door was pushed open from the outside and a furtive pair of small eyes appeared. As the eyes met Qin Yu's, they immediately revealed an obedient and flattering expression. "Master, you called for me? Come in and speak." "Yes." The chicken overlord drilled its way in. Its current status was that of General Golden Wu's only beloved pet. Its status was extraordinary. At the very least, on this airship, everyone was in awe of it. At this time, the chicken overlord was wearing a small set of armor that had been gifted to it by true Saint Baisu. Ever since this fellow heard that the barbarians were savage and that the battlefield was extremely dangerous, it had worn the armor without ever taking it off. Qin Yu frowned. It wasn't that he was dissatisfied with this fellow, but that it was a bit strange for a chicken to wear such exquisite armor. Whatever, it was just a minor matter. Chicken Overlord, what do you think of this seal? The chicken overlord's eyes widened, a choking expression on its face. It thought that this evil star was good in all aspects, but his ability to name things was just too terrible. Chicken Overlord. What was this? It was simply too pungent. Cough. Master, I've thought about it. You can call me Little Chicken or Little Overlord. It's simple, smooth, and friendly. I understand, Little Chicken Overlord. The chicken overlord cried. It rubbed its eyes and decided not to speak any further. Otherwise, who knew what sort of critical attack was waiting for it? Master, this seal is a joss flame treasure. Hee, the western wilderness is quite rich. The cost to make this isn't low. A sharp light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. You recognize this? The chicken overlord said. I heard from the white ape that this is a treasure that can only be refined when the divine kingdom is powerful to a certain degree. Its goal is to make it faster and more convenient to collect joss flames. Then, did the white ape say how to absorb the power of joss flames from a treasure? The chicken overlord said, it's simple. When the joss flames accumulate to a certain degree, they will automatically transfer and fuse into the divine kingdom. There's no need to control them. Qin Yu looked at it, not speaking. Was this fellow pretending to be stupid, or was it really confused? The chicken overlord shrunk its neck back, its eyes wide open. Master, you shouldn't be thinking of... That's right, you've guessed correctly. The chicken overlord's legs buckled, and it nearly fell to the ground. It looked at Qin Yu with shock. It really wanted to roar out loud. Master, please don't play dumb, okay? You are a broken world cultivator. After coming to the desolate domain, in a short period of time, you suddenly have your current status. People should know how to be content with what they have. What are you messing around with? Do you think you can easily move the joss flames within the seal? As long as even a tiny bit of this was leaked out, then everything would be over. It originally thought that after a short period of twists and turns in its life, it would welcome a new and brilliant tomorrow. So how did it suddenly reach this step? Gulp. The chicken overlord gulped. Master, I don't know. There was sincerity in its eyes, but there was also a bit of guilt and a bit of helplessness in that guilt. Qin Yu coldly sneered. Stop pretending. Just looking at your eyes, I know you aren't telling the truth. The chicken overlord nearly choked to death on its own saliva. Its eyes were filled with horror. This evil star actually understood it so deeply. Speak. Perhaps I can add something to your meal today. Qin Yu had no expression. What he would add would naturally be a charcoal roasted chicken, or a spicy chicken wing, or a spicy diced chicken, or a boiled chicken. The chicken overlord fell to its knees, a sad expression on its face. Master, I really don't know. It shivered. Facing Qin Yu's sneering expression, it shivered and said, It's just that in the past, White Ape inadvertently mentioned something called the incense tree. Something called the incense tree. Something that can steal the power of joss flames from joss flame treasures. It's true. Master, that's all I know. But as for how to do it, White Ape didn't say, and I didn't ask. I'm sure you believe me. Qin Yu frowned. He glanced at the trembling chicken overlord. This fellow shouldn't have the courage to continue speaking such nonsense. For better or worse, he had obtained a little harvest, the incense tree. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He waved his hand. Leave. Don't think of slacking off. Keep an eye on the women outside. Consider this as atoning for your crimes. The chicken overlord turned and left, afraid that if it was even a step slower, it would become an additional meal. This evil star was becoming increasingly terrifying. He actually wanted to eat chicken. The room quieted down. Qin Yu rubbed his chin, a thoughtful look on his face. "Stone pagoda!" he shouted out loud. Hum! Space trembled and the phantom of a stone pagoda appeared. "You've already heard what I said just now. Is there anything I can tell you about the incense tree?" The stone pagoda hesitated for a moment. "Master, I have faintly come into contact with the incense tree before, but my memories are very blurry. The incense tree seems to be a method of using the power of one's own incense flames. It can be used to plunder other incense flames for one's own use." A sharp light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. This was exactly what the chicken overlord had said. "How?" The stone pagoda said. "I can't remember clearly. I can only recall as much as I can. But before I have absolute confidence, Master shouldn't try anything." Qin Yu nodded. "I naturally know this. If the Western Wilds were to discover that he was intercepting the incense flames, then Qin Yu's disguise would lose its effect. The consequences could be imagined. Master, I'm going to sleep first. Let's see if I can obtain any harvests." The stone pagoda phantom trembled for a moment before vanishing from sight. "Who?" Qin Yu let out a light breath. His expression was calm. He couldn't be too hasty when it came to intercepting the incense flames. For now, he would take his time and see how things went. Western Frontier Border Army Camp. News had already arrived from the imperial capital. The newly promoted Golden General Ning Qin had sent 100,000 Blue River soldiers to reinforce the front lines. They would arrive soon. With his status as the Golden General and a commander of 100,000 soldiers, everything was obvious. His Majesty wanted Ning Qin to take control of a portion of the Western Frontier Border Army. A single stone stirred up 1,000 waves. No one wished to have their authority divided. Moreover, the will of the military and the authority of the emperor clans had always been in a faint confrontation. They were constantly probing each other and compromising. This was a natural resistance. "General Wu, the reinforcements have passed through Mountain Pass. They will arrive by tomorrow at the latest." A counselor worriedly said. Everyone else couldn't help but frown. The commander of the Western Frontier Border Army, Wu Tongtian, was one of the top leaders of the military. He came from a family of hunters in the wilderness of the frontier and had been recognized and promoted by nobles. Because of his outstanding merits, he had accumulated many years and been promoted step by step until he finally became a commander. He was one of the 4 great generals of the empire. He was of medium stature, but he didn't seem angry at all. He faintly smiled. "I naturally have to follow His Majesty's will." As the commander of the Western Frontier Border Army, he had to take the lead in expressing his attitude. The emperor clans could allow this, but the military had its own will. Even so, they would never allow a commander of the border army to openly disobey His Majesty. The counselor's eyebrows furrowed even tighter. "But Commander Wu's letter!" Wu Tongtian waved his hand, interrupting him. "I will explain this. Pass down the order that no one is to act rashly. Make preparations to arrange for reinforcements." "Yes, Commander." In the tent, everyone bowed and left in a single file. Soon, Commander Wu's attitude spread throughout the camp. Chapter 1520. "Marshal Wu, you have a good plan." A sneer sounded in the tent. Yi Sang put down the wine glass, and with a bang, it exploded into pieces. "Great General, watch your words." Below him, a general smiled bitterly. "Humph." The number 2 general of the Western Border Army coldly snorted. "Since this general dares to say it, I'm not afraid of Marshal Wu finding out." His cousin's letter had long been delivered to the army, and he had read the contents. Although it didn't say anything directly, it made his stance clear. When Wu Shuai did this, he did not put the Yi family in his eyes. Wu Shuai couldn't say anything even if his grumbles reached his ears. The general smiled bitterly. "Grand General, let's think about what we should do now." Reinforcements will pass through the Shanghai Pass and arrive in the blink of an eye. Yi Sengde stood up and waved his hand in annoyance. These people in the border army have all left bloody footprints with each step. They've charged through mountains of corpses and seas of blood to get to where they are today. No one would be willing to have their power seized by others. Even if it is His Majesty's will, there will be resistance. What made him angry was that Wu Shuai had actually cowered, so he could only rush to the front. Whether it was the prestige of the Yi family or the will of his cousin Fighting Tiger, he had no other choice. He took a deep breath. Go! Send someone to invite Jiang Qingzi over. Tell him that I have an urgent military matter to discuss with him. The sky-bearing monarch's plan was already laid out in the open. If Ning Qin wanted to gain a foothold in the border army, he would need help. Jiang Qingzi was the key. At the western border of the empire, they had arrived at the border army camp that stretched for thousands of miles. On the airship, Qin Yu opened his eyes, a look of amazement on his face. As far as the eye could see, a baleful aura soared into the sky, and all the clouds in the sky were torn into pieces. The majestic aura condensed into the pressure of a great army. It was like a coiling dragon and crouching tiger, opening its mouth to devour people. This was the Western Desolation's western border camp, an army purely made up of cultivators. Previously, Qin Yu had borrowed the strength of his 100,000-strong army to suppress the demonic sect and force peak sovereigns to bow their heads. At this moment, there were more than 1 million soldiers in front of him, and it was appropriate to say that they were filled with an imposing aura. 3,000 li away from the main camp, the airships stopped one after another. The messengers rushed towards the main camp with a letter in hand. This was the rule of the army, and it was also out of respect for the military commander who had been in charge of the Western Border Army for many years and had great prestige. General Wu Shuai was born into a family of hunters at the border. He obtained his current position by fighting on the battlefield. Of course, the merits on the battlefield are one thing, and the capital also needs to have nobles to speak up. After all, the position of Commander-in-Chief of the Western Great Border Army is not something an ordinary person can take. True, Saint Baiyu said in a low voice. Qin Yu frowned. Successor Yi family? True sage, Baitu nodded, that's right. But the general doesn't need to worry too much. It's precisely because of Marshal Wu's high position and authority that some things can't be done too obviously. After a slight hesitation, he continued, Jiang Qingzi, Uncle Jiang, you have met him before. He is an old general in the Western Border Army. Although he is only ranked 4th, he has a deep foundation in the army. My uncle has already sent a letter to him, and I believe he can help you integrate into the border army as soon as possible. Qin Yu nodded, but he didn't relax. It wasn't convenient for Wu Shuai to do some things, but as long as he passed on a bit of his attitude, there were many things that he didn't need to do. To him, opening up the military situation as soon as possible was also a test. But in this matter, Qin Yu was in a passive position. He could only react according to the situation and act accordingly. The messenger officer returned. According to the directions of the border army, he stopped outside a camp. General Golden Ningqin, Marshal Wu, is currently holding an urgent military meeting with several great generals. Please rest in the camp and wait for Marshal Wu to summon you. The young border army general's face was covered with traces of wind and frost. He bowed, and without waiting for Qin Yu to reply, he turned and left. This scene caused the many generals that stepped off the airship. Their complexions changed. In terms of military rank, this young border army general was at least 7 or 8 ranks lower than General Golden Ning. If he didn't have a backer behind him, would he dare to be so rude? It seemed that this newly promoted General Golden Ning's situation wasn't too good. The several generals that had come to ask Qin Yu for instructions turned and hurried away, commanding their subordinates to set up camp. True Saint Baitu's complexion darkened. He clenched his teeth and said, General, rest assured. You have a noble status, and you also came here on the orders of the emperor. They won't dare to be too insolent." Qin Yu had a calm expression. "Let's go. Let's settle down first." A simple cold shoulder was enough to establish his dominance. Wu Shuai had made it clear that he didn't like this newcomer that had dropped in from the imperial capital. With Wu Shuai's prestige and status, the difficulty for Qin Yu to integrate into the border army would instantly increase by countless times. Great tent. Several great generals bowed and drew back. Wu Shuai drank a mouthful of hot tea and leaned back in his chair. He rubbed his face until it flushed red. "Have the reinforcements arrived?" "Yes, everything has been arranged." "How did General Golden Ning perform?" A strange expression appeared on the counselor's face. He was very quiet. A sharp light flashed in Wu Shuai's eyes, and he smiled. He had become famous overnight and received a high position. Now that he had come here on the orders of the emperor, he actually didn't respond at all. This was a smart person, and a smart person was undoubtedly easier to get along with. Between His Majesty and the Empress Yi family, Wu Shuai didn't want to make a choice. He also couldn't do that. If he maintained a slightly biased attitude and maintained a basic balance, that would be good for everyone. His thoughts raced, and Wu Shuai changed his mind. He lightly said, "It's too late today. Tomorrow morning, General Golden Ning, please come to the commander's tent." "Yes, Commander." In the army, there was no distinction between day and night. The army maintained a posture that was ready to go at any time. Although this place was still some distance away from the front lines, one could still feel the fluctuations of fighting coming from time to time. It was filled with cruelty and slaughter, but Qin Yu had rested well. Based on what he had learned, he carefully analyzed the current situation. If he wanted to open up the situation and gain a foothold in the border army, it would be difficult to do so through normal means. There would be many people willing to set up obstacles for him, making it difficult for this chess piece of the Emperor clan to make every step he took. Even if they didn't disobey His Majesty's will, that didn't stop them from letting His Majesty see that his decision was wrong. So, opening up a strange path was likely Qin Yu's only chance. But he had to wait. In particular, Qin Yu didn't know the true situation within the Western Frontier Border Army. He would at most believe 30% of the information he heard. The rest would have to be grasped by himself. "General Golden Ning Qin, Wu Shuai invites you." A shout sounded out from outside the tent. Qin Yu left the tent and waved his hand to stop the indignant Saint Bai Yu. He said, "Lead the way." The young general's eyebrows arched up. The coldness on his face faded. He bowed and left. "General, you have gone too far. With your rank, this young general," Qin Yu interrupted Saint Bai Yu. He lightly said, "Wait for me to return." Today's young general was the same person as yesterday's young general. Qin Yu didn't know who he was, but for him to be so arrogant, his status must be extraordinary. His guess was soon answered. This young general was a guard of the commander's tent. In other words, he was one of Wu Shuai's people. Thinking about it, this wasn't strange. If it weren't for Wu Shuai expressing his stance, no one would have dared to be so insolent. The commander's tent was massive. It was like a moving hall. The guards were tight. At the very least, at this moment, Qin Yu could sense at least 7 divine senses locking onto his body. Sharp and cryptic. 2 of them were at the peak of the ruler realm. The military truly had as many powerhouses as clouds. No wonder they had the confidence to stand up to the emperor clans. The young general stopped. He said in a low voice, reporting to Commander, "General Golden Ning Qin has arrived." Several breaths of time later, a person walked out from the commander's tent. His expression was calm and his eyes were bright. From his clothes, he seemed to be a counselor. He smiled and bowed. "General Golden Ning, Commander requests your presence." Qin Yu nodded. He cupped his hands together. "I'll have to trouble you." He stepped into the commander's tent. The situation in the tent was different from what Qin Yu imagined. But even though there were many people, he immediately found the main character, Wu Shuai. It wasn't just because he sat in the center of the commander's seat, but also because of his intimidating aura. His aura was awe-inspiring, like a lion or tiger occupying the summit of a mountain, suppressing the world. At this time, his eyes fell, covering Qin Yu. A sharp light flashed in their depths, like a bolt of lightning tearing through the clouds. It instantly pierced through the vast skies. Qin Yu felt as if he had been completely seen through. His heart chilled. He suppressed his restlessness and took several steps forward. He bowed. General Golden Ning Qin greets Commander Wu. The slightly noisy commander's tent quieted down as he spoke. Eyes gathered on him. Within the icy coldness, there was a deep pressure. Qin Yu had a calm expression. He stood where he was, not moving at all. Wu Shuai smiled. There is no need to be so polite. Please rise. Thank you, Commander. Qin Yu stood up. 100,000 reinforcements have come under the orders of the Emperor. They have all entered the camp yesterday. I already know about this. Wu Shuai gestured. General Goldening, please sit. Below the commander's tent there were 6 seats. The second seat on the left was empty. This seat wasn't low at all. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Thank you, Commander. He stepped into the seat and sat down. As he thought, the eyes that looked at him became much colder. But Qin Yu had no choice in this, so he didn't say much. Yesterday he was given the cold shoulder, and today he was praised. His methods were all over the place, but if he continued like this, it would be beneath him. Wu Shuai's laughter echoed out. Yesterday, the military situation was urgent. Everyone discussed with me late into the night. It was too late, so I didn't want to disturb General Golden Ning's rest. Today, I will introduce him to my comrades in the army. This was an explanation and also a way to ease the situation. Qin Yu's eyes swept around. I am General Ning Qin. Greetings, generals. The first one to respond was the person to his left. I am General Zhao Chong. Greetings, General Golden Ning. Surnamed Zhao. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. As he responded, he could faintly see some familiar traces between his eyebrows. Without a doubt, this General Zhao should be related to the great princess. Harvest, the second reward of doing good to others. Someone spoke up, breaking the deadlock. I am General Jiang Qingzi. General Ning Qin, we meet again. The white-haired, white-bearded, old general slowly said. Qin Yu cupped his hands together in greeting. I am General Yi Sang. A voice suddenly sounded out. The commander's tent fell silent. Qin Yu looked up. Yi Sang had a calm expression. Speaking of which, General Ning Qin and I also have some relationship. Yi Wangu is my nephew. I heard that before he died, General Ning Qin was the last person to see him. He went straight to the point, full of malice. With these first words, this number 2 general of the Western Border Army expressed his attitude. He was very dissatisfied with General Ning Qin. Chapter 1521. The commander, tent, was silent. Qin Yu met everyone's eyes and nodded. Yes, before Yi Wangu died, I was present. He paused for a moment and looked at Yi Sangdu, his eyes sharp. When I was in the imperial capital, in consideration of Marshal Yi Boha's face, there were some things I couldn't say. But today, I'll have to ask General Yi to pass them on. If Yi Wangu is dead, then he is dead. Do not mention this matter again. If anything else is drawn out, I fear it will tarnish his reputation after his death and bring shame to the Yi family. Ho! Good heavens! Qin Yu's words clearly had a hidden meaning. His attitude was tough and threatening. Yi Sangdu's complexion changed. With a loud bang, he slammed the table. General Golden, you cannot speak nonsense. Just what do you mean? Qin Yu glanced at Wu Shuai, who was still calmly watching from the sidelines. He sneered inwardly. Not long ago, I was ordered by the emperor to enter the western savages. This matter shouldn't be a secret to everyone. When I left the western savages, Yuangu coveted my treasure and tried to kill me to steal it. Thus, he exposed his aura and attracted the bitter barbarian cultivators. Qin Yu was expressionless. He stared at Yi Sangdu. So, what I mean is that Yi Wangu died to the bitter barbarian cultivators because he brought this upon himself. The commander, Tent, was in an uproar. General Golden Ningqin had actually revealed such a shocking news. In an instant, everyone believed him. After all, saying these words was the same as tearing off all pretense of cordiality with the Yi family. This was simply seeking death. It was because of this that there was no possibility of Qin Yu lying. What nonsense! Yi Sangdu roared. With a loud cracking sound, the table in front of him shattered. General Golden, my Yi family's reputation cannot be tarnished. Looking at the pale-faced Yi Sangdu, Qin Yu remained expressionless. If Wu Tongtian continued to act like a bodhisattva, then don't blame him for dragging everyone into the mud. This was the Yi family secret. Touching it would be troublesome. At that time, no one would have a good time. Enough! Wu Shuai suddenly spoke up. He frowned and swept his eyes over Qin Yu, a warning in them. You are all generals of the army. How can you harm the friendship between you because of a dispute of tongues? No one is allowed to speak of what happened in today's tent. I will not forgive anyone who disobeys. Yes, Marshal. Everyone stood up to receive the order. Wu Shuai naturally wasn't happy that Qin Yu had forced him to stop this battle. He lightly said, in the future, everyone will have plenty of opportunities to get closer to each other. Military affairs are urgent, so let's directly discuss the accounts. A soldier quickly stepped forward and tidied up the mess, setting up a new table for Yi Sangdu. He snorted coldly, bowed to Wu Shuai, and sat down with a frosty expression. After retreating to the edge of the commander's tent, a group of military affairs counselors carefully returned. They set up the sand table and prepared the information. Yesterday, powerful warriors from the barbarian tribe tried to break through the third battlefront. Our camp was ambushed and suffered some losses. According to the statistics, the intensity of the barbarian tribe's attacks has been increasing for the past 7 days. We have reason to suspect that the internal strife within the barbarian tribe has died down. The specific cause is unknown, and we are still trying to find out. The black-robed man who appeared in the Berserker tribe's camp in the battlefield has been confirmed. He's a black shaman berserker of the Berserker tribe. The condition of the wounded barracks is basically stable. However, there aren't many medicines left to treat the barbarian's poison. We need to prepare them as soon as possible. Piece after piece of information was delivered to everyone. The generals and the commanders' tent judged the situation and then made adjustments to the war situation. But none of this had anything to do with Qin Yu. He had just arrived at the Western Border Army and was completely ignorant of the battlefield situation. To him, these pieces of information were completely useless. The army was at war, and the military situation was urgent. The commander's tent became busy, and no one bothered with General Jinwu, who had appeared out of nowhere from the imperial capital. Qin Yu was like an invisible person. As everyone began to discuss, this feeling became increasingly clear. An invisible repulsive strength surged within the commander's tent, isolating him from the outside. If it were anyone else, they feared they would feel uneasy, embarrassed, or annoyed. But Qin Yu didn't. He had already prepared himself. What was happening in front of him wasn't anything at all. At the very least, he was still sitting in the commander's tent. As long as he didn't want to leave, no one could make him leave. Night fell, and the camp was brightly lit. There were people coming in and out of the commander's tent from time to time. The handling of military affairs had finally come to an end. Wu Shuai ordered some people to serve tea. After moistening his throat, he finally thought of Qin Yu. He smiled and said, "The military situation is urgent, so I have neglected General Jinwu." If you feel bored, you can return to your tent and rest. He paused for a moment and said, "Once the war situation stabilizes a little, I will make some adjustments and see which part of the military affairs General Jinwoo will be in charge of." In terms of position, Qin Yu's current position was fourth in the Western Border Army. He had occupied Jiang Chengzi's previous position, giving the Western Wasteland great emperor enough face. But this position was just an empty shell without any real power. After delaying for a while and waiting for the war situation to ease, Qin Yu could be casually sent to some corner to eat dirt. This would be enough to make him a laughingstock in the border army. For a general to rush to the border army to end up sitting on a cold bench, this was a sign of incompetence. Wu Shuai stood up. "Leave. According to the plan, we will launch a counterattack tomorrow. Have the barbarians return to where they belong." "Yes, Wu Shuai." The generals all stood up. "Hold on." Qin Yu suddenly spoke up. Facing Wu Shuai's sharp gaze, he cupped his hands together and bowed. "I don't understand the current state of the war, so it's not good for me to intervene. But His Majesty has ordered me to lead the army to the western border, so it's not good for me to just hide in my tent and enjoy my leisure. Ning Qin earnestly requests Great Commander to temporarily hold the position of a counselor in the army so that I can participate in the daily military accounts. This is also in preparation for my future arrangements. I ask for Great Commander's permission. Neither servile nor overbearing, polite and courteous. By bringing up the Western Wasteland Great Emperor, he was also giving Wu Shuai face. The dignified General Jinwoo, on the surface, was the fourth highest authority in the border army. He didn't participate in actual military affairs and only needed the position of a counselor to participate in the accounts. If he rejected this, it would be too excessive. Although the western border was far away, it was still under the attention of the imperial capital. His Majesty would not be happy. Wu Shuai nodded. "Good, then let's do it like this." The generals left the tent. A cold snort sounded out in Qin Yu's ears. He looked up at Yi Sang. He approached and lowered his voice. "Ning Qin, there are some things you should have been warned about. It is best not to speak about them." Qin Yu said, "If no one forces me, I naturally won't say anything. After all, if I stir up trouble, it won't be easy for anyone to clean up." Yi Sang turned and left. Looking at his back, Qin Yu frowned. Today, it seemed as if he had easily broken through this Yi family general's difficulties. But the truth was that Qin Yu had used the Yi family's secret to force Wu Shuai to appear. This had already left him unhappy, and Wu Shuai's attitude was undoubtedly the key to whether or not Qin Yu could stand firm in the army. This Yi family general might have already calculated this point. With a small loss of face, he had created a difficult situation for Qin Yu. What a good plan! "General Jinwoo, I still have military orders to carry out, so I won't speak with you any further. In the future, you and I will be closer." Qin Xiling faintly smiled. He cupped his hands together and left. Although he seemed polite, he was actually distant. It had to be known that providing help in the hour of need was always better than adding flowers to embroidery. Qin Yu was currently in a difficult situation. If he really wanted to befriend him, he wouldn't have this sort of attitude right now. This person was unreliable. Jiang Chengzi straightened his back. In the Western Border Army, he was an old general who had walked step by step to where he was today. His prestige was extremely high and he had countless trusted aides. If he had his help, Qin Yu would be much more relaxed. But today in the commander's tent, besides the greetings at the start, he hadn't said a single word. Something seemed to have gone wrong with the Skyrise monarch's plans. Qin Yu didn't know what had happened, but the only external force he could rely on had most likely failed. Returning to the tent, True Saint Baiyu anxiously welcomed him. "General, the 100,000 soldiers in the camp have been transferred to the front lines." Qin Yu frowned for a moment before composing himself. "I understand. True, Saint Bayou bitterly smiled. General, they were brought to the western border camp by you. He didn't finish his words. Originally, these 100,000 soldiers were the foundation that His Majesty had given them. But now, before they could do anything, they had been removed. This was the same as removing the firewood from the bottom of the cauldron. It had directly cut off Qin Yu's foundation. With no soldiers under his command, how could he have a place in the army? Qin Yu said, "This is Wu Shuai's will." Today, Wu Shuai had invited him into the commander's tent and had transferred the entire army, leaving him without a single person under his command. It seemed that Wu Shuai was indeed dissatisfied with his actions. True Saint Bayou took a deep breath. General, I will go now and pay a visit to Uncle Jiang. Qin Yu didn't stop him. He watched as True Saint Bayou left the tent, his expression calm. He wasn't optimistic about the results of True Saint Bayou's trip. Jiang Qingzi's silence today had already expressed his attitude. Towards Qin Yu, he maintained a neutral attitude. He wouldn't suppress him, but he wouldn't help him either. In truth, the current situation wasn't friendly to Qin Yu. If he wanted to turn things around, he couldn't even see an 80% chance of success. If he couldn't turn things around, the imperial capital would surely be disappointed. This wasn't beneficial to Qin Yu's future plans. He needed to borrow strength from the western wilderness. The only good news was that Wu Shuai still cared about face and didn't stop Qin Yu from attending military affairs. He had the qualifications to attend the meeting. What he needed to do was wait for a turning point to appear and blaze a new path. To break out of this situation, True Saint Bayou hadn't returned for the entire night, but Qin Yu wasn't worried about his safety. Even without Jiang Qingzi, there shouldn't be anyone who wanted to offend the sky-bearing heavenly king. After tidying himself up and putting on his armor, he went straight to the commander's tent. General Jean. Outside the commander's tent, the weather-beaten young general frowned. At sunrise, the commander's tent meeting will be held on time. You came late. Qin Yu said, I will pay attention next time. He looked up at him and arched an eyebrow. Did Wu Shuai order me not to enter the tent? The young general's complexion changed. He coldly snorted and drew back. Qin Yu didn't bother to lower himself to his level. He stepped into the commander's tent. The meeting had already begun. The one speaking was Yi Sangdu. As he saw Qin Yu enter, he only glanced at him but didn't stop speaking. Qin Yu bowed to Wu Tongtian and sat down to listen. The so-called military counselor was a general term for those who assisted with military affairs. But Qin Yu didn't have any specific responsibilities in his hands. When he participated in the meeting, he could only bring his ears. He didn't have a chance to speak. As night fell, Qin Ning left the commander's tent. He looked up at the starry skies above his head. This time no one spoke to him. Qin Xiling only nodded and hurried away. Qin Yu's lips curved up and he turned to leave. True Saint Bayou returned. He had an awkward expression as he saw Qin Yu. General, before he could speak he was interrupted. Qin Yu said, I believe Jiang Qingzi must have his own difficulties. I can understand. True Saint Bayou let out a long breath. Thank you for your understanding, General. But what should we do next? He had been sent by his uncle to follow Ning Qin into the army. The two of them shared weal and woe. If Ning Qin's performance was outstanding, he would receive credit for it. Otherwise, he would also be implicated. Qin Yu said, I have obtained Wu Shuai's permission to participate in the meeting. I'll wait for a period of time and grasp the situation of the war before making any further plans. True Saint Bayou bitterly smiled. That's all we can do. After sending him away, Qin Yu sat down and drank some tea. His calm eyes revealed a thoughtful light. What he said just now was, of course, only an excuse. He wasn't really waiting for a period of time. True Saint Bayou was likely trustworthy, but he still had to guard against him. Of course, Qin Yu also had to use True Saint Bayou's attitude to send a signal to the outside that he was trapped. Only by doing so would he be able to make some people relax and not pay too much attention to him. In the following half a month, Qin Yu, this golden general, truly became a transparent person. He punctually attended the meeting every day, but he never had the slightest chance to meddle in military affairs. The gazes that fell on him became increasingly few and far between. Even when they occasionally looked at him, most of them were filled with ridicule and pity. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before a reprimand from the imperial capital arrived. Then, this golden general would have to leave with his tail between his legs. Qin Yu's expression was calm, as if he were tacitly agreeing to all of this. No one knew that countless pieces of military information had gathered in his mind. In terms of the right to know, Qin Yu, who participated in the meeting, was at the highest level of the Western Border Army. Qin Yu peeled away the silk of a cocoon, constantly deliberating and calculating, finally grasping some things. If his guess wasn't wrong, then he should be able to confirm it tomorrow. This was the turning point he had been waiting for. At night, the sounds of battle shook the heavens and earth. A terrifying aura soared into the heavens. A barbarian army had launched a sneak attack, breaking through the Western Desolate's front lines for 3,000 miles. Nether Radiant City had fallen. The ninth sun hadn't risen yet, but the commander's tent was already brightly lit. The cultivators in the army all had heavy expressions, worry in their eyes. After Nether Radiant City was broken through, our army immediately responded and fought with the barbarian army in an attempt to retake the city. But the barbarians are extremely stubborn and have fought for an entire night without retreating. Both sides have lost over 30,000 soldiers. Intelligence shows that the barbarians are still reinforcing. There are over 100,000 barbarians stationed in Nether Radiant City. Everyone Nether Radiant City is less than 1,000 miles away from the mine. The goal of the barbarians is self-evident. We must retake Nether Radiant City. The mine cannot be lost. The front lines had been defeated. In the commander's tent today, besides the several leaders of the Western Border Army, there were also many frontline generals present. Everyone's opinion was clear. The reason the barbarians had attacked Nether Radiant City was because of the mine. They had to mobilize the army as soon as possible to repel the barbarians. The barbarians have reinforced Nether Radiant City, and their attitude has been extremely stubborn. I fear it will not be easy to retake it in a short period of time. Jing Chengzi suddenly spoke. The voice of this old general caused everyone to quiet down and look over. He stood up and cupped his hands together. Commander Wu, the mine is of great importance, and there cannot be any mistakes. In order to avoid any accidents, we must send our best generals to guard the mine. The commander's tent became even quieter. Mine to the Western Border Army, this was a nearly taboo existence. No one was willing to guard this place, even if it occupied a vital position in the strategic map of the Border Army. To guard the mine, to them, this was the same as a dead end. Once they stepped in, there was no turning back. They would be locked in that bitter and barren land for the rest of their lives. A sharp light flashed in Wu Tongtian's eyes. General Zhang's words are correct. The mine cannot be lost. He swept his eyes around the tent, as if he were considering who to send. Yi Sang suddenly stood up. Commander, the mine is of utmost importance. In the current situation, we need a general with a high enough rank to be qualified to guard it. He lifted a hand and pointed. General Jinwu has rushed to the western border under the Emperor's orders. He has yet to be assigned a specific position, but he is qualified to do so. Shua, Shua. Countless eyes gathered on Qin Yu. Qin Yu's complexion was ugly. He frowned and said in a low voice, Commander, I do not know the details of the mine. If I rashly go, I fear there will be an accident. I ask that Commander carefully consider this matter. I indeed do not have full confidence. Yi Sang said, General Jinwu, there is no need to be so modest. You came here under the orders of the Emperor's mausoleum, so I naturally believe in your ability. He turned and cupped his hands together. "General, the military situation is urgent. The barbarians may attack at any moment. We must decide on a general to guard the mine as soon as possible." Wu Tongtian slowly nodded. "General Jinwu, heed my order." Qin Yu revealed a look of grief and indignation. "Subordinate is here. I order you to lead your personal guards and immediately rush to the mine to guard it. You must leave immediately without delay. You must ensure the safety of the mine." "Yes, Commander." News spread through the entire border army camp like a gust of wind. General Jinwu, Ningqin, had been ordered to guard the mine. Once he left, it was likely he would never return. Tragic. This was far too tragic. Chapter 1522. The wind is bleak and the water is cold. A hero leaves. He wants to return home. My name is Baizu, and I come from a branch family of the Western Wasteland. Because my uncle is trusted by His Majesty, I was given the title of Sky-bearing King. My status is decent. Basically, even if I don't do anything, I can still live a carefree life as a wealthy young master. But if a person doesn't have any goals, how are they any different from a salted fish? So I followed the orders of my uncle, Sky-bearing King, and followed General Jinwu to the Western Border Army camp. I originally thought that I would be able to obtain some good fortune here and rise in the army, fighting for a bright future for myself. But things are hard to predict. General Jinwu will be rejected by the border army and exiled to a mine to guard. I will also follow him as his trusted aide. How heartless the heavens and earth are. Tears flow down my face. Every step I take, I turn back 3 times, but the turning point has yet to arrive. The border army camp gradually moves further and further away, and all I can hear is the howling of the wild winds. My future is bleak and without light. Border army camp. At this moment, countless eyes were looking at the 2 departing figures. That's right, there were only 2. This was because, as the commander's orders were passed down, the generals responsible for taking care of daily matters immediately ran away without a trace, afraid that they would be implicated. The 12 Imperial Guards didn't hesitate to stay out of this. With their special statuses, the border army camp tacitly agreed to this. Only true Saint Baizu, who was Qin Yu's trusted aide from the start, didn't even have a chance to leave. Of course, there were still people responsible for escorting them. This was to prevent any accidents from occurring and prevent General Jinwu from smoothly assuming his position. And the one responsible for this was a young general with a weather-beaten face. His expression was cold, and he didn't hide his arrogance at all. This was the one stationed at the commander's tent and could be considered an old acquaintance of Qin Yu. "Commander, General Jinwu is not ordinary. I fear His Majesty won't be happy with your arrangements." The counselor revealed a worried expression. Wu Tongtian had a light expression. "His Majesty doesn't like me to begin with. But as long as the Western barbarians don't retreat, I will be as steady as a mountain." Although the foundation of his rise to power was his own merits, the Yi family had contributed greatly in the process. Of course, in return, he had guaranteed the Hauer family's influence and authority in the army. During these years, the emperor clans had tried to intervene in the army, but all of their arrangements had failed. This was no secret. The counselor smiled bitterly. "Even so, this is still too obvious." Wu Tongtian put down his teacup. "If your Majesty is dissatisfied, you can go and find trouble with the Yi family first. After all, I'm just taking advantage of the situation today." His eyes flickered as he pondered. Jiang Qingzi, this old general of the border army, was close to the bloodline of the Sky-bearing King. It was indeed unexpected that he would make a move. Yi Sangdu had some tricks up his sleeve. This was the only and most logical explanation. "Congratulations, great general. You have banished General Jinwu and exiled him to guard the mines. From now on, he will never be able to rise again." His subordinates congratulated him loudly. The corners of Yi Sangdu's mouth curled up, revealing a pleased expression. Of course, He believed that all of this was due to his own scheming. Since Jiang Qingzi was so smart, he would definitely give him some benefits in the future. As for the possible consequences of this matter, humph! His Majesty in the imperial palace would soon be embroiled in trouble and would not have the energy to find trouble with him. What's more, the dignified House of Yi was one of the two great forces in the army. It was not a force that could be touched casually. Even the emperor clans had to show them a certain amount of respect. This was the balance obtained after countless conflicts and compromises between the military and the emperor over the endless years. After entering the mines, Ning Qin's future path would be severed. After a period of time, he would gradually be forgotten by others, and then he would be able to find a chance to make a move. Yi Sang understood his cousin's intentions. On the other hand, Ning Qin would definitely die. Jiang Qingzi had a solemn expression. He stood at the entrance of the tent, looking into the distance with a calm expression. General, this subordinate cannot understand this matter. Behind him, a lieutenant furrowed his eyebrows. Jiang Qingzi waved his hand. I have my own reasons. There is no need to speak further. Yes. The lieutenant bitterly smiled. But soon, the day of the letter will arrive. How should we explain this to the sky-bearing king? His highly regarded nephew had been sent into the mines by his own general. Although this was only a side effect, this was still the truth. How could the sky-bearing king not be angry? Jiang Qingzi said, I will write the letter. There is no need for you to worry about it. You may leave. This subordinate bids his farewells. The lieutenant turned and left, his face full of confusion. Yi Sang-do indeed had some information that could be used against the general in the past. However, this was not enough to make the general, who had always acted calmly and with a sense of propriety, suddenly make such an abnormal move. There must be another reason. As the footsteps faded away, the surroundings quietened down. Jiang Qingzi took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He shook his head, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. In truth, he did not know why Ning Qin made such a request. Moreover, he had brought up his Majesty and the sky-bearing king, so he had no choice but to agree. However, there was one thing that could be confirmed. Ning Qin was the one who led them to the mines. In other words, everyone in the camp today was wrong. The future might not be as they had imagined. Who knew what would happen? But what was Ning Qin planning to do? The young general, who did not speak or smile and had traces of hardships on his face, brought along a group of subordinates who also had an ice-cold temperament and were clearly keeping people at arm's length. This caused the air pressure in the group to be extremely low, and even breathing became extremely difficult. In the carriage, True Divine Bayou's face was slightly pale. He barely managed to maintain his calm. General, you have a plan, right? You must have one. Qin Yu glanced at him. True Divine Bayou was about to cry. Brother Ning Qin, my general, please don't be so stubborn. We cannot go to the mines. We absolutely cannot go there. Otherwise, you and I will be finished in the future. Qin Yu said, the commander has already given the order. Unless we disobey it, we have no other choice. He paused for a moment and continued to say, as for the consequences of disobeying orders, I don't need to tell you. I believe that there are many people in the camp waiting for us to do this. True Divine Bayou's body shook. He understood Qin Yu's meaning. Disobeying the commander's order was tantamount to rebelling. At that time, all they needed to do was send out a single order, and an army would arrive and turn them into mincemeat. True Divine Bayou didn't doubt the terrifying strength of the Empire's army. His eyes widened and his face turned blank. Then we will accept our fate. I want to go home. Qin Yu closed his eyes. He could understand the despair in True Divine Bayou's heart. Mines, information about this place surged into his mind like a tide. Although it was called a mine, the truth was that it wasn't accurate. Strictly speaking, this place was a massive mineral mining area. The products here could be used to forge all sorts of military equipment and make up for the endless losses on the battlefield. It was an important area where military resources were stored. According to common sense, being stationed in such an important area of military supplies was a lucrative job, not to mention some private transactions. Just the benefits offered by various parties was enough to make one's mouth drip with oil. After all, who wouldn't want more military supplies, and the better the quality? There were other reasons why the mines had become a place that everyone avoided and was a taboo existence in the Western Border Army. A long time ago, this mineral-rich area was ruled by the barbarians, but in a great war, it was occupied by the Empire's army. As for the specific details of that war, Chinyu had already used his status as a counselor to look them up. It wasn't an exaggeration to call it a meat grinder. The Western wilderness and Western barbarians had lost at least 1 million people in this area. It could be said that in this massive mining area, every inch of soil, every piece of ore was stained with blood. There were even 2 peak sovereigns who perished together with a barbarian tribe grand shaman. And the change in the fate of the mines was related to this. Before the barbarian shaman died, he used the terrifying deaths of millions on both sides to display the barbarian curse. This place was ominous. The aura of the barbarians shrouded this area, and any human cultivator that stepped into this area would be corroded by this aura. The consequence of this was that the human cultivators stationed here or those who entered the mines would be barbarian. Their bloodline would no longer be pure, and they would become half human and half barbarian. They would become an alien species that both sides rejected. Besides the first batch of people who fought for the qualifications to station in the mines, when the barbarian curse erupted, this place became a plague that everyone avoided. Abandon, of course they couldn't. The Western wilderness had suffered countless casualties and consumed countless war resources in order to seize this area. This was all in order to forge military supplies here and reduce the loss of resources to the Empire. Mining had to be carried out, and there had to be a garrison. But those who were corroded by the barbarian curse would forever remain here without a chance of leaving. After all, the military also wanted face. This sort of scandal had to be suppressed. Violating military rules, committing grave mistakes, losing in battle. All sorts of military cultivators were sent here to guard the mines for the Empire and continue to provide minerals. And this was the hot potato that Chinyu was about to take over. It was also because of this that true Saint Baiyu was in such despair. Once one stepped into the mines, they would be corroded by the barbarian curse. There would be no light to speak of in the future. But in reality, was this a problem for Chinyu? He was the new barbarian emperor. He didn't need to worry about the barbarian curse. This was the taboo that everyone in the Western Border Army camp avoided. But in Chinyu's eyes, this was a turning point. This was an important area for military supplies and was responsible for providing nearly half of the army's military supplies. As long as he could control this place, he would be able to gain a firm foothold in the army. The Western Wilderness Army has dispatched a team to the mines. A team of barbarians was hiding underground. In the darkness, one could see a ruthless and cruel light surging in their eyes. The Black Sorcerer's plan hasn't been smoothly carried out yet. We have to stop them to prevent any accidents from occurring. A barbarian roared. His words soon gained the approval of everyone present. Kill them. With a roar, the barbarian team left through the exit. With a whistle, the earth began to shake. With a loud rumble, heavily armored barbarian war horses wildly galloped over from the distance. One by one, the sturdy and well-built barbarian warriors leaped onto their mounts. Kill! With a roar, they rushed out like a raging flood. Within the carriage, Chinyu opened his eyes. He frowned, a bit of helplessness on his face. Just as he was about to smoothly enter the mines, an accident had occurred. Outside the carriage, there were already roars. The elites of the Western Wilderness Army had clearly sensed that something was wrong. Defend against the enemy. A young general with a face covered in frost roared out. He drew his sword and stared at the distant horizon, at the barbarians howling towards him. War horses. The strongest barbarian soldier type, the kind that could fight 10 enemies at once. The High Commander was right. The barbarian's goal was indeed the mines. Whoosh! With the sound of breaking air, a signal flare shot into the skies. But in order to avoid a surprise attack, the border army camp hadn't set up a transmission array. Even if they saw the signal, it would take time for reinforcements to arrive. Facing the strongest barbarian war horses, they might not be able to last. As his thoughts raced, the barbarian war horses had already arrived. Kill. Chapter 1523. Qin Yu was currently the Golden General, so it was definitely inappropriate for him to attack the soldiers of the Western Wilderness. But as the barbarian emperor, it was even more impossible for him to lay his hands on the barbarian tribe's war horses. Thus, Qin Yu chose to watch from the sidelines. Outside the carriage, the roars of battle were like a tidal wave. From time to time, the mournful screams before death could be heard. True sage, Bai Su's face turned pale. General, what should we do? Although he was a saint and his strength was quite tyrannical, he still did not have the slightest confidence in facing a formation of brute race cavalry. Qin Yu glanced at him. You want to help? True sage, Bai Yu nodded instinctively. Although he was dissatisfied with the people of the Western Border Army, he still had to unite against the barbarian tribe. Moreover, after these border soldiers were killed, it would be their turn next. Qin Yu nodded. All right, you can go. True sage, Bai Yu glanced at the calm Qin Yu, unable to guess what he was thinking. Gritting his teeth, he turned around to push open the car door. But just as he turned around, his vision suddenly went black, and his consciousness fell into darkness. Qin Yu glanced at the fainted true Saint Bai Tu, and his lips twitched. In the end, Zhang Xian was still unable to control the power of the palace lantern well enough. He had only intended to knock Zhang Xian out temporarily. Who would have thought that, in a moment of carelessness, he would nearly smash his head into pieces? He coughed and wiped away the embarrassment in his heart. Then he rubbed his chin. Outside, the slaughter was still continuing. But it was clear that the border army was already in a state of being surrounded and slaughtered. Before long, they would all die. At that time, he, the new berserker sovereign, would be forced to come out. Of course, this result was unacceptable. Killing these war riders wouldn't be difficult for Qin Yu, but his status as the Goliath sovereign wouldn't allow him to do so. This involved the brand of the berserker's bloodline. What a headache! Qin Yu took a deep breath. If he really couldn't do anything, then he could only reveal a trace of his aura and force these cavalry to retreat. Then he could think of a way to erase this hidden danger. The sounds of fighting gradually stopped. Just as Qin Yu was about to attack, his eyes brightened. He sensed a familiar aura. It was him. His thoughts raced, and he immediately came to a decision. With a loud bang, he kicked open the door. General Jinwu of the Western Desolate is here. Barbarians, prepare to die. The shout was like thunder, spreading far and wide. The surrounding brute race cavalry instantly locked their cold and bloodthirsty eyes on him. However, right at this moment, the ruthless leader's expression changed slightly. Retreat. Rumble. The brute tribe cavalry carried the corpses of their brethren and disappeared from sight in the blink of an eye. The young general, who had fallen to the ground with blood spurting out of his mouth and nose, his face full of traces of hardships, stared at the scene before him with wide eyes. To think that the Golden General would possess such might before he could finish his thoughts, he fainted. Qin Yu's eyes seemed to inadvertently sweep over somewhere in the distance. He grabbed true Saint Bai Tu and then brought this young general with him. Whoosh! He soared into the sky and headed straight for the mine. The war riders that had retreated from the killing field respectfully knelt on the ground. In front of them was a barefooted ascetic cultivator. A terrifying scar ran through his face and tore open his scalp. Although it had already healed, the reddish-purple color was still sinister. Great ascetic cultivator, why did you stop us from killing General Jin Wu of the Western Wilderness? Although he was extremely respectful towards this person in front of him, the war rider couldn't die for no reason. He needed an explanation for his dead brute tribe comrades. The ascetic cultivator's eyes were warm and gentle, completely different from his fierce appearance. I will give you an explanation for this matter, but not now. He waved his hand. Go, take away Black Shaman, and end the matter of the mine. The war rider leader frowned, but didn't dare to speak. Yes, my lord. Rumble, rumble. The earth shook and roared. They howled far away. The ascetic cultivator let out a deep breath, and his eyes brightened. He never thought that the golden general who had suddenly risen up in the Western Wilderness Army would be that young man. Could all of this be related to His Majesty, the brute sovereign? The ascetic cultivator turned and left. He had to bring back what happened here as soon as possible. My name is Ironstone. That's right, I am Ironstone with a heart of stone. Ever since he joined the army, he had followed at the side of the commander and participated in hundreds of battles. What sort of scene had he not seen? He had long since tempered himself into a tiger's courage. He had never feared death. For a soldier, dying on the battlefield was the best ending. I, Ironstone, have always been waiting for this day to come. But now I have to admit that I am afraid. Because in this world, there are many things that are even more terrifying than death. For instance, I was actually brought into the mine. Because of my injuries, I have no idea how long I have been unconscious. Although there are no changes on the surface of my body, I can already feel some changes within me. I have been tainted. I am no longer a pure human, but a half-human, half-barbarian creature. I was terrified. I couldn't imagine how I was going to survive in the future. What accompanied this was endless anger. If looks could kill, Golden General Ningqin would have already been riddled with holes. After forcing back the barbarian war riders, shouldn't you have waited for reinforcements from the main camp? Even if you wanted to leave the battlefield, you could have just chosen any direction. Why did you have to run all the way here? Taking a step back, if you wanted to come, then come. Why did you have to bring me along? If I could choose, then I, Ironstone, would rather die on the battlefield. Woo, 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 woo. A strong man made of iron was crying in grief. Had he ever seen such a scene before? True Saint Bayou's face was filled with grief. He looked at Chinyu, who was sitting cross-legged, not too far away. His eyes were extremely complex. The barbarian war riders had been intercepted, and Golden General Ningqin and his subordinates had been severely injured. They no longer had the strength to guard the mine. What a good reason. What a perfect opportunity. As long as he pushed the boat along with the current, he could escape from this nightmare. But Golden General Ningqin refused. Not only that, but he even took the initiative to lead him and Taisher, who was now crying like a little wife, into the mine. Everything was settled. I, Bayou, have the bloodline of the Emperor clan flowing through my veins. I am a youth with great ambitions. But in the end, I ended up in this situation. I was trapped here for the rest of my life, with no chance of leaving. Farewell, imperial capital. Farewell, all my beauties. He thought about how many years later, as the curse of the barbarians worsened, he would slowly show signs of turning into a barbarian. He was neither a human nor a ghost. At this moment, from deep within the mine, he could hear the constant sobbing. True Saint Bayou's eyes were wet. Don't even think about interrupting my plan. The mine would be my base. I would stand firm and take control of the military. This was the starting point. Chin, you could feel True Saint Bayou's gaze. This boy's eyes were filled with bitterness and resentment. But that didn't matter. Soon, he would learn that this so-called hopeless situation was meant to be broken. Shwa! Chinyu opened his eyes. He heard footsteps. Someone was coming. The general stationed in the mine greet Golden General Ningqin. A low and deep voice rang out. As the blades of armor rubbed against each other, the dim and cramped mine was suddenly filled with a much more somber atmosphere. As mentioned before, the people stationed in the mine could be summarized as the losers of the border army. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been exiled here. filled with despair and unwillingness, passively suffering the corrosion of the barbarian's curse. It wasn't easy for him to get over his mental breakdown. Then he struggled to gain some power in this mine. But suddenly the border army issued an order. A golden General Ningqin appeared out of nowhere and became the true controller of the mine. Who would be willing? Therefore, it was understandable that he was filled with rejection and hostility. When Qin Yu turned around, true Saint Baiyu had already stopped. He warily looked at the people in front of him. They were tall, and their skin was dry and rough. Some of their bodies were even covered in scales of different colors. Their pupils were pale green or blue, and they were no longer perfectly round. Instead, they were vertical and flat, like some savage beast. This was the transformation of a barbarian. The function of the barbarian curse wasn't to turn humans into barbarians. Otherwise, the result would be that many spies from the Western Desolate would appear within the barbarians. What was terrifying about it was that it could corrode the human bloodline and forcefully twist and transform them. This caused the cultivators who entered the mine to fall into a state where the human and barbarian bloodlines coexisted but couldn't merge. That was why their appearances had changed so strangely at this moment. As the saying went, a twisted appearance often gave birth to a twisted soul. True Saint Baiyu could feel thick malice from these people. He couldn't help but take several steps closer to Qin Yu. Although saints were strong, the half-human barbarian aura was terrifying. This was especially true for the one standing in front, the one with the black scales covering his forehead. Ruler. Moreover, he was an extremely powerful existence that wasn't too far away from becoming an absolute being. Even such a powerhouse wasn't able to resist the corrosion of the barbarian curse. If this person were to attack him, he would only need to casually strike out, and he would be turned to powder. Rise. Qin Yu glanced at true Saint Baiyu. Seeing his pale complexion, he knew that he had been frightened. Then he could only take the stage himself. I am General Ningqin, conferred the title of General Golden by the great emperor. I have come here on the orders of Great Commander Wu Tongtian to guard the mine area and prevent any surprise attacks from the barbarians. So, Qin Yu took a step forwards. There was a loud thud on the ground. From today onwards, I have the final say here. Bang! A powerful aura broke out from his body. It was like a mountain crashing down, suppressing everything within. When he was at the Western Desolate Border Army camp, Qin Yu had some scruples in his heart and had no choice but to endure. But now that he had entered the mine, he didn't want to waste any more time in this chaotic and lawless land. He didn't need any plans or schemes, nor did he want to obtain the loyalty of these half-human barbarians. It was enough to suppress them and have them submit to him in awe. After a brief silence, the black-scaled half-human barbarian was the first to kneel on the ground. Walala! Everyone prostrated themselves on the ground. The mines of this forbidden land were dark and cruel, far from what the outside world could imagine. For them to rise up and become rulers of power, this was because their strength and methods were all top choices. Even so, these people could only kneel on the ground and acknowledge Qin Yu's status. This was because he was strong enough. Moreover, the most terrifying thing was that the aura that Qin Yu released caused them to instinctively feel a deep sense of fear. It was like this was a strength that could easily control their lives. With just a single thought, he could doom them to eternal damnation. In fact, the half-human barbarians hadn't sensed wrongly. As they bore the barbarian curse, what they sensed was the aura of the palace lantern. Qin Yu really could use the palace lantern to control the curse in their bodies and instantly wipe out all life. Lord Blackscale, are we going to submit like this? The half-human barbarian with an enchanting figure and rough skin asked. Snake Woman, he is very strong. I don't have the confidence to win. Blackscale slowly said, his attitude clear. The Snake Woman screamed, This mine is our mine. He is just an outsider, and yet he wants to take away all our rights. I can't accept this. Blackscale glanced at her. If you can't accept this, then you can think of a way yourself. I am tired. The snake woman clenched her teeth. She twisted her enchanting figure and left. Black Scale, if you think it through, then come to the snake cave and look for me. Humph! Black Scale coldly coughed, a cold light in his eyes. That cheap snake woman. She actually tried to provoke me into confronting General Jean. She's trying to provoke me into going against General Jean. She's sending me to my death so that she can reap the benefits. General, it's true that the snake woman is ruthless, but the authority over the mind should have been yours. Are you really going to hand it over like this? A subordinate angrily roared out. Black Scale sneered. General Jean is very strong, and I am not his match. If he wants authority, then I can only hand it over. But the mine isn't truly a place without control. If he grasps authority but cannot maintain the operation of the mine, there will definitely be problems. General, are you talking about the sinners down there? Go and tell them that the person in charge of the mine has changed. If they don't want to be purged, they should know what to do. A sharp light flashed in Black Scale's eyes. General Jean Chin was indeed strong, but the mine was a place where people would be eaten alive. Western Border Army Camp. Wu Tongtian frowned. He looked at the weak and helpless girl in front of him. Ruru, I have already sent word to the Night Demon, Sect Master. He will arrive soon and take you back to the sect. No, I want to go to the mine. The girl who sounded like Ruru but was actually called Ruru revealed a determined expression. She blushed and bit her lips. I am already his woman. Of course, I want to be with him. This reason was strong enough. Wu Tongtian's frown deepened. The mine isn't an ordinary place. Are you sure about this? Ruru nodded. I want to go. Wu Tongtian waved his hand. If that's the case, then don't blame me. The Devil Sect was the leader of the world's sections. Although they didn't have an Emperor Realm cultivator, their foundation couldn't be underestimated. As the general of the border army, he wanted to give them some face. Since they didn't appreciate it, there was no need to pester them. When he thought of the mine and Qi knew, a trace of hesitation appeared in Wu Tongtian's eyes. He vaguely felt that this matter wasn't as simple as it seemed. However, the barbarian curse was formed by the sacrifice of millions of lives and injuries. Even an Emperor Realm cultivator couldn't resolve it. What could Ning Qin do? The barbarian curse was harmless to the barbarians. Moreover, Qin Yu, the new emperor of the barbarians, actually made him feel comfortable. The power in his body became more active. The mine was a terrifying forbidden place for the cultivators of the western wilderness. But for the barbarians, it was a sacred place for cultivation. It could speed up their cultivation. Qin Yu opened his eyes and exhaled. A sharp light flashed across his eyes. He could vaguely feel a strange fluctuation deep underground. And these fluctuations seemed to have sensed Qin Yu's existence. It was calling to him. No, to be more precise, it was a cry of joy. Qin Yu didn't feel any malice from it. He thought of the barbarian curse and the terrifying great shaman. Perhaps it had something to do with him. It seemed that he had to find a chance to go underground and take a look. But now he had to take care of some small matters to prevent them from being depressed. Qin Yu thought for a moment and said, "Invite true Saint Baiyu here." After suppressing the barbarians, Qin Yu changed his residence. Although the conditions of the mine were simple, the ruler could still enjoy luxury. At the very least, this cave abode that was built underground and inlaid with countless illuminating gems was full of extravagance. "General, you were looking for me?" True Saint Baiyu walked in and bowed. He tried his best to appear calm, but he couldn't hide the bitterness in his eyes. Qin Yu glanced at him and took out a pill. "This pill can suppress the mutation in your body. It will protect you from being corroded by the curse for a period of time." True Saint Baiyu suddenly looked up. His eyes were wide with joy and disbelief. He impatiently swallowed the pill and sat down cross-legged. He closed his eyes and sensed the changes in his body. As a warm current swept through his body, He could clearly feel the terrifying changes in his body rapidly vanish. He had become pure again. Shua! True Saint Baiyu opened his eyes and laughed. Brother Ningqin, I knew that you would have a backup plan. You wouldn't be so easily manipulated by others. Qin Yu sneered. I feel that you have cursed me countless times in your heart these past 2 days. Having his thoughts seen through, True Saint Baiyu revealed an embarrassed expression. Qin Yu was disinclined to argue with him. He threw out another pill. Take this to Ironstone. Otherwise, I'm worried that he will drown my mansion in tears. For such a strong man to cry like this, it was clear that he was heartbroken to the extreme. True Saint Baiyu caught the pill with both hands. He awkwardly said, General, this, in his opinion, a pill that could suppress the changes in his body and resist the barbarian curse, was incomparably precious. Although he had eaten one, if it lost its effect in the future, Qin Yu immediately saw through his thoughts. He frowned and said, If I tell you to go, then go. I still have more pills, but only the 3 of us can know of this matter. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Tell Ironstone that if he dares to reveal anything, I will throw him into the mines to do hard labor. General, rest assured. True Saint Baiyu strode away. He was confident that he could make Ironstone keep his mouth shut. After all, a pill that could suppress the changes in his body and temporarily isolate the curse only existed in Qin Yu's hands. If anyone dared to disobey him, their fate could be imagined. In Ironstone's heart, as long as there was a tiny bit of hope, he would know what to do. The so-called pills were in truth only some ordinary pills used to restore one's strength. It was only because Qin Yu had poured in the aura of the palace lantern that they had such an effect. With this aura protecting them, as long as Qin Yu didn't take it back, True Saint Baiyu and Ironstone wouldn't have any problems. In order to open up the situation and gain a firm foothold in the army, it was unrealistic to rely on a single person. Qin Yu needed helpers. True Saint Baiyu was one of them. Ironstone could be considered test. His body was marked with the mark of the mines, and he was destined to be abandoned by the commander tent. It would be best if this boy listened to orders. Otherwise, Qin Yu had 100 ways to instantly kill him. Chapter 1524. Deep underground in a pitch-black mine, there were some special crystals that emitted a dark green light. They barely managed to outline pairs of icy cold and terrifying eyes in the darkness. There's a letter from above. They say that the border army has sent a general who has taken over authority over the mine. They want us to do something to let this general know that the mine isn't something he can control. In the deep and low voice, every syllable seemed to have been soaked in blood for countless years, emitting a thick and pungent smell of blood. Looking at his features, he was a man, but beneath the dark green light, one could faintly see that he didn't seem like a human at all. He had 3 arms, 2 on the left and 1 on the right. On his shoulders were 2 heads, one large and one small. The one who spoke was Big Head. Just as his voice fell, Little Head coldly sneered. Do you think those bastards above will obediently hand over their authority? It seems that this newcomer has some strength. Another voice sounded out. To have us cause trouble is to use us as a knife. With empty words, do they think we are stupid? Big Head looked at the faint mountain of flesh in the darkness. He slowly said, They have agreed to send 500 women down. Gulp. In the darkness, there was the sound of gulping. Normally when we ask for them, they refuse and refuse. Now that they are so generous, it can only mean that Mr. Littlehead is right. The new general is very strong. Being enemies with him might not be the right choice. That's right. We underground rats have barely managed to survive to this day, so it's best if we don't take risks. Littlehead screamed. How about we give the choice to the new general? If he can give us better conditions, then we will recognize his rule. Otherwise, he can't blame us for not giving him any face. Big Head slowly said, That is a good idea. Soon, the sinners in the darkness reached a consensus. As for their demands, There was certainly a way to pass them to the higher-ups. In fact, these underground sinners were extremely efficient. Qin Yu saw a letter on his desk in his residence, but he didn't know where this letter came from. After opening it, the content was extremely respectful. It simply summarized the contents of the matter, but within this respect, there was also an unyielding attitude. If you agree to the conditions, then everything can be discussed. I guarantee that you, the Guardian General, will be able to complete your tasks on time every month. Otherwise, humph, of course, everything would have to be changed. Putting down the letter, Qin Yu rubbed his chin and sneered. It seemed like some people still didn't understand the situation. Since that was the case, he would make use of this matter to let them know. In the mine, he had the final say. Be it above or below ground, no one had the right to bargain. Causing trouble would only lead to death. Half an hour later, the barbarians stationed in different areas hurried to General Jin Wu's residence. They looked at each other with confusion in their eyes. Clearly, they did not know what was going on. After waiting for a while, they were finally allowed to enter when their hearts gradually became anxious. Greetings, General. Black Scale, Lamia, and the others knelt on the ground. Since they had already submitted, they naturally didn't lack superficial skills. Since you've come, then kneel. His words made the half-human barbarians' hearts tremble, and their eyes revealed uneasiness. The air fell deathly silent. After several breaths of silence, Hei Lin took a deep breath. General, may I ask what has happened? Qin Yu glanced at him. Good question. I have a letter in my hands, but I don't know how it grew legs and ran into my room. He held it between two fingers and flung it forwards. With a light puff, the letter cut open the ground and stood straight up. Hei Lin opened the letter. As he swept his eyes over it, his complexion changed. How insolent! These underground sinners deserve to die. They dare to threaten the general. I ask that you give the order to severely punish them. Qin Yu faintly smiled. Of course there will be punishment, but what I want to know is who gave these conditions to the underground sinners. There was silence. It doesn't matter if you don't admit it. Women aren't ores that can be casually hidden away. As long as we search them, there should be some harvests. Hei Lin, you were the one in charge of the mine, so where do you think we should start searching? Hei Lin furrowed his eyebrows. He slowly said, General, I believe that this matter was deliberately provoked by the underground sinners. So you mean that I shouldn't investigate? Hei Lin nodded. He wanted to say something, but was interrupted. But I have already investigated. Qin Yu's eyes swept over everyone. When you left, Advisor by Su had already left. I hope that your subordinates aren't too impulsive. If something happens to Advisor by Su, I will not be happy. Shua. A cold sweat appeared on Hei Lin's forehead. He cursed inwardly. These underground sinners actually dared to play such a trick. Once he passed this hurdle, he wanted to see just how he would deal with these trash in the future. It's fine, it's fine. Those women have been imprisoned in secret places. True Saint by Su has just arrived, so it is impossible for him to find them. Just as this thought appeared, there was the sound of footsteps. True Saint by Su walked in and bowed. General, I found them. Hei Lin fiercely looked up, meeting True Saint by Su's finger. They had been imprisoned by Hei Lin in a secret mine. At this time, his first thought was that there was a traitor. Then he couldn't admit it. Hei Lin's thoughts raced. He roared out, slander. This is naked slander. Advisor by Su has just arrived at the mine and isn't familiar with the terrain. How could he possibly find those women in such a short period of time? True Saint by Su sneered. You don't believe me? They have already been brought back. I can have these women identify who imprisoned them at any time. His eyes revealed an icy cold light. After all, according to what they said, Hei Lin, you have already enjoyed several of them in advance. More and more beads of cold sweat appeared. He Lin's eyes revealed a trace of anger. His last bit of hope vanished. They had really been discovered. Looking at General Jin's methods and his previous expression, something bad was going to happen. Something bad was going to happen today. He Lin took a deep breath and stood up. General Jin, how despicable of you. In order to thoroughly control the mind, you actually used such a method to harm me. He turned and roared. Everyone, today He Lin have had bad luck. Now it will be your turn. If you don't want to be killed one by one, then follow me in rebellion. The half-human barbarians behind him began to breathe heavily. What He Lin said was what they were most worried about. Now, it seemed that this really was a chance. Although General Jin was strong, if they joined forces, they might have a chance. As for the consequences of this, what the border army camp wanted was a steady monthly supply of ore. As for their internal killing and struggles, they wouldn't care about them at all. Humph! Qin Yu suddenly sneered. If I wanted to kill you, I wouldn't need to go through so much trouble. He lifted a hand and pressed his fingers forwards. Dong, there was a loud explosion on the ground and cracks spread outwards. He Lin was casually pushed to the ground. The air fell deathly silent. All of the surging impulses, ruthlessness, and killing intent vanished without a trace. All that was left over was fear and trembling. Even someone as powerful as He Lin, someone who had long since reached the ruler realm, had been casually suppressed. General Jin was inconceivably strong. At this time, True Saint Baiyu couldn't help but widen his eyes in shock. He knew that since Qin Yu had acted, he would surely have a way. But he never imagined that Qin Yu would have such a formidable strength. Was there some good fortune in the trip to the western savage lands, or had he been hiding his strength all this time? But no matter what the reason was, this was good news for True Saint Baiyu. His future was already tied to Qin Yu's. It was good to enjoy the shade of a great tree. The stronger he was, the better. At this time, in the eyes of everyone, Qin Yu was like a great mountain shrouded in clouds, unfathomably profound. But in truth, he wasn't that strong. The reason he could casually suppress He Lin was because of the curse power of the barbarians within his body. But Qin Yu wouldn't explain this. He wanted to rule the mind and make it his base. The more these barbarians feared him, the better. He Lin dripped with sweat. He never imagined that Qin Yu would be strong to such a degree. If Qin Yu could suppress him with a single hand, then even if all the barbarians joined forces, they would only be sending themselves to their deaths. It was impossible for them to join forces to resist General Jin. No one was willing to die with him. General Jin, you cannot kill me. He Lin roared. There are a portion of the sinners underground that obey my orders. If you kill me, the sinners will riot. At that time, the mine will stop mining and we won't be able to produce enough ore. You will be in deep trouble. Qin Yu nodded. Thank you for the reminder. Bang! With a dull thud, He Lin's entire body seemed to be grasped by a giant, invisible hand. His entire body twisted into a ball. Blood gushed out from every orifice of his head and his aura vanished from sight. Like this, a powerful ruler-level barbarian had died on the spot. Fear flooded the hearts of the other barbarians. If someone as powerful as He Lin could be killed just like that, then what about them? General, please spare us. We know nothing about this. General, please investigate this. The snake woman slumped to the ground, her enchanting body constantly shivering. Not too long ago, she had instigated He Lin to fight General Jin, but she never imagined that this would be the result. Before He Lin could do anything, he had been killed on the spot. As she thought of this, the fear in her heart deepened. As she looked at the person in front of her, endless fear gushed out from the depths of her heart. Before, I said that I had the final say in the mine, but it seems you didn't take my words to heart. I hope that this matter will help you remember better. Qin Yu waved his hand. Take this corpse and leave. If anyone dares to offend you again, this will be the end. The group of barbarian powerhouses trembled as they picked up He Lin and left in panic. In normal times, when He Lin was killed, the first thing they would think of would be to divide up the territory he left behind. But now, no one dared to act rashly. This was because from today onwards, the mine had a true master. Everything had to follow his will. General is invincible. True Saint Bayou's face was filled with excitement. In the future, this subordinate will be loyal and devoted. I will support the general with all my strength and accomplish great things in the army. Qin Yu glanced at him. Stop flattering me. For these next 2 days, I will need to deal with some matters. Help me pick up someone and make arrangements for her. Calculating the time, Ruru should have arrived by now. When he left the camp, Qin Yu had already made preparations. True Saint Bayou respectfully bowed. Yes, General. Underground mine. Dark and icy cold. The air surged with restlessness and restlessness. He Lin had died, under the watchful eyes of everyone. He had been killed on the spot by the newly arrived General Jean. It was said that the entire process had been extremely easy, and he hadn't been able to resist at all. The little head mister screamed, "This is a provocation to us." There was silence in the darkness. By killing He Lin, the General Jean had used such an unyielding attitude to reject their conditions. There was no way this matter would end peacefully. Of course, what was more important was that this General Jean was far stronger than they had imagined. Everyone, what has happened has already happened. How should we respond? The big head slowly spoke, his face calm. Humph. The mountain-like shadow coldly sneered. General Jean is truly awe-inspiring. He killed He Lin and at the same time tore off our faces and trampled all over us. You and I must respond to this matter. Otherwise, it will be difficult to convince the masses, and it will be difficult to maintain our own interests. That's right. General Jean is indeed strong. But I fear he doesn't know that the foundation of this mine is in our hands. The little head Mr. Ning Xiao revealed a mouthful of sharp teeth. Then, let us join forces and teach him a ruthless lesson. The sinners underground went on strike. There were guards stationed in the mine, but more importantly, there were people who had to go deep underground. They had to dig out the ores needed to forge weapons from the dark and dirty mines and then transport them to the surface. Before, it was said that the guards stationed in the mine were a plague that everyone avoided in the border army camps. But compared to the sinners underground, these people were already in a much better situation. Most importantly, it was said that the great shaman of the barbarians had set up a curse altar underground. The deeper one went, the more terrifying the power of the curse became. Emperor Realm experts had once descended in the western wilderness in an attempt to eradicate the effects of the curse. But in the end, they had no choice but to retreat after going tens of thousands of feet underground. The losers of the internal strife of the empire, the criminals who had committed the most heinous crimes, the rebels who had been suppressed and captured. For countless years, they had been continuously thrown into the depths of the mine. Nobody knew just how many miners, who were generally known as sinners, had after years of accumulation and reproduction. But according to the Emperor Realm expert, who had gone deep underground, the layers of tunnels intertwined like a dense spider web. They had long since formed dirty cities, hidden underground and in the darkness. It could even be called the country of the sinners underground. General, the sinners have rioted. The ore production has been halted. The barbarians were sweating profusely, their faces filled with fear. They weren't worried about Qin Yu. They were only afraid that they would be implicated in their anger. In fact, when He Lin was killed, they knew very well that this moment would come. But they didn't expect the sinners to react so quickly. It seemed that they wanted to take this opportunity to teach General Jean a harsh lesson. Although the mine was the territory of the western wilderness and was guarded by the border army, its true owner had long been the sinners underground. The border army and the sinners had only reached an agreement that they would provide an endless supply of ores and the border army would provide supplies. But the sinners had long accumulated resources. Even if they were locked in supplies, they could still last for a long time. Eating people was a very simple matter for them. But if they lacked ores and couldn't supply the army with weapons, it would be a great disaster. All of them would be burned to ashes by the anger of the military. Chapter 1525. I understand. Qin Yu laid down his teacup, his expression calm. Looking at General Wu Jin's current appearance, the barbarians thought that he didn't know the horrifying consequences of the sinners going on strike. They began to sweat profusely. General, things have gotten out of hand. The sinners have already put forth their conditions. We must satisfy them 3 times as much as before we can resume mining. The barbarian wiped away his cold sweat. We do have some reserves in our hands for emergencies, but compared to the mine's output, this is nothing more than a drop in the bucket. In another 3 days, the sinners refuse to cooperate with us, so there is no way we can gather enough. Blackscale's death, as well as Qin Yu's extraordinary strength, left them with no way to complain. The snake woman clenched her teeth. General, the only way is to agree to the sinners' conditions. Qin Yu swept his eyes over them. He lightly said, "There is no need to go through so much trouble. Since the sinners are going on strike, let's suppress them." The barbarians were stunned. Their eyes widened in panic. Their first thought was that General Wu Jin wanted to use this chance to eliminate them all. Simple. As long as he ordered them to bring people into the mine to suppress the sinners, they would never be able to return. Simple, straightforward, and effective. Their complexions were deathly pale and sweat streamed down their backs. All of them felt as if they were sitting on pins and needles. Qin Yu's lips curved up in a mocking smile. "Don't worry, I won't send you to your deaths. I will personally suppress the sinners' strike." "General," True Saint by you anxiously said, "the depths of the mine are filled with unknown dangers. With your status, how can you take such a risk? We need to consider this matter at length." As he spoke, he winked at the barbarians. He was well aware of what the situation beneath the mine was. It was a sinkhole that would bury anyone who entered. He couldn't figure out why Ning Qin would suddenly make such a stupid decision. Qin Yu glanced at him and waved his hand. "It's decided. You can all go back. I will make up for the ore within 3 days." The barbarians respectfully bowed and drew back. As long as they weren't suppressed underground, they could do whatever Qin Yu said. Moreover, deep in their hearts, they were hoping that Qin Yu would die beneath the mine. At that time, this place would become their world again, and they wouldn't have to live in fear like they did now. As soon as the half-human barbarian left, True Saint by two growled, "General, the underground of the mine is a den of demons. Even the Emperor Realm experts, sent by His Majesty, couldn't solve the problem. You must not go." Qin Yu said, "There is no need to speak any further. I know what I am doing." He got up and walked outside. "Remember, don't forget what I told you before." A moment later, Qin Yu appeared outside a mine that led underground. Looking into it, the light quickly dimmed. Soon, all that was left was pitch black. It was like a large mouth that was choosing people to swallow, and also like an abyss that could swallow everything, causing fear to arise from the bottom of one's heart. Most of the soldiers stationed at the border showed signs of turning into berserkers. At that moment, shock appeared in their eyes as they watched the scene before them. The Jin Wu general, who held great power, actually wanted to enter the mine alone to suppress the sinners' strike. He was simply courting death. The snake woman licked the corner of her lips and said, respectfully, "General, according to our investigations, this mine leads deep underground, but we are unable to determine where it leads to." She paused. "This subordinate must remind you that the mine is like a maze, and there is a powerful barbarian curse. You must consider this carefully." Qin Yu glanced at her. "Although that's what you say in your heart, you must be very anxious to see me walk in. Isn't that right?" The snake woman's expression changed greatly. She immediately fell to the ground. "General, this subordinate wouldn't dare." Qin Yu sneered and didn't look at her again. He strode into the mine. "Tell them that I will return in 3 days." The footsteps went far away and soon disappeared. The snake woman looked up at the quiet mine. Even though she had seen Qin Yu step inside with her own eyes, she still felt a strong sense of disbelief in her heart at this moment. General Jean, did he just take the initiative to enter the underground of the mine? The snake woman took a deep breath and steadied her mind. A cold light flashed in the depths of her eyes. If an Emperor realm existence couldn't solve this problem, then so what if the Jinwu general was strong? He was digging his own grave by entering the mine. When the sinners spread the news that the Jinwu general had been killed in 3 days, her arrangements over the years would be put to good use. Hei Lin was dead, and the Jinwu general was dead. She would become the master of the mine. The border army team that had escorted Ruru had stopped in the distance. No one wanted to taste the barbarian curse. "Miss Ruru, this is as far as we can go," a commandant said in a low voice, a trace of pity in his eyes. In his opinion, Ruru was too kind. She was clearly being taken by the Jinwu general, but she was still willing to follow him. But he had no right or position to persuade her otherwise. The carriage was pushed open from the inside, and little Meaty stepped out. Suddenly, she frowned imperceptibly. There was movement on the other side. "Alert!" The commandant roared. News of the barbarian cavalry killing the Jinwu general had reached the camp. But soon, they were sure that it was a false alarm. The person who had come was a guard of the mine. His appearance was very obvious, and he had stopped when there was still some distance between them. True Saint Baiyu smiled bitterly. "Miss, I'm here on the general's orders to receive you." Ruru said. Ning Qin went underground. True Saint Baiyu thought that the camp had received the news and nodded. "Yes, the sinners underground are on strike. The general has gone to suppress them alone." On the other side, the faces of the commandant who had escorted Ruru and his subordinates were extremely interesting. The news quickly spread to the camp. Wu Tongtian frowned, a pensive look in his eyes. He felt more and more that he couldn't see through Qin Yu. Was this the person who had made Yu Bohu suffer a loss, and the emperor had chosen him to join the army? No matter how he looked at it, Qin Yu didn't deserve it. The underground of the mine was a terrifying place. Even if the Jinwu general was strong or had a trump card, he was doomed to die. Whatever, it was his own choice. Even if he died, no one would blame him. This was good news for him. "Boy, you're courting death." Yi Sang sneered. Was the underground of the mine a place that anyone could enter? What a pity. He had originally planned to wait until he was no longer noticed before killing him, but he had given him a quick death. Otherwise, if he had fallen into his hands, he would have begged for death. Soon, Yi Sang's attention returned to the military report in his hands. Ning Qin would undoubtedly die. After the sinners killed him, the conditions would be met and the ore supply would be restored. The storm would then dissipate. These things were no longer worth his energy. Jing Chengzi sighed. He began to wonder if his previous actions had been too thoughtless. Ning Qin was finished. Qin Yu walked in the underground mine. He didn't know that in the eyes of the people outside, he had already become a corpse. Of course, even if they knew, they probably wouldn't care. The truth triumphed over everything. It was dark and cold. Besides the sound of his own footsteps, there was only the howling of the wind. It was like the howling of a monster, making one's scalp tingle. But Qin Yu was very calm. It wasn't just because he had the palace lantern in his hand, but because darkness was one of the fundamental strengths he controlled. Light and darkness were one. Walking in the darkness at this time was no different from a fish in water. There was no discomfort at all. Everything in front of him was as bright as day. Another fork in the tunnel. Deep underground, after countless years of mining, a massive amount of ore had been mined. Indeed, a maze-like mine tunnel had formed. At this point, Qin Yu had already passed nearly 100 forks of various sizes. But every time, he was able to quickly make a choice. This time was no exception. Schwa! With a turn of his feet, Qin Yu stepped into the tunnel on the right and continued forwards. Suddenly he frowned. A bright light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Someone was watching him. Were they the sinners underground? The aura was indeed strange. It was different from that of humans and barbarians. It was more chaotic, violent, and difficult to control. But Qin Yu didn't care about it. He allowed this aura to follow him from afar as he continued deeper into the darkness. The Imperial General Ningqin had broken into the underground tunnel alone, wanting to suppress the sinners. When the news came, the sinners only treated it as a joke. But now the joke had been confirmed. Ningqin had really come. Moreover, he continued forwards, moving deeper and deeper underground. The several leaders of the sinners, the true rulers of this filthy city of sin, gathered together once more. The Imperial General Jin has arrived. He has been targeted by the demon eye. On the shoulder, the big-headed man slowly set a thoughtful look in his eyes. The little man screamed, "What are you waiting for?" He delivered himself to our door on his own initiative. "It's been a long time since I've eaten pure human flesh." A deep laugh echoed out from the mountain of flesh. "Kill the Imperial General Jin and swallow his cultivation and strength as an apology to us." "That's right. Since he is seeking death on his own initiative, how can we not help him?" Sneering, in the eyes of the sinner leaders, Qin Yu was the prey that had been delivered to their mouths. 3 arms, the 2 strange leaders roared out, "Crow, I'll leave this matter to you. Release the dried bones." In the darkness, a deep and vicious laugh echoed out. "Of course, my babies have long been starving." Blackscale's death was enough to prove just how strong the Imperial General Jin was. They certainly wouldn't personally act and give the Imperial General Jin a chance to counterattack. Deep underground, there were many things that could kill. All they needed to do was wait for the fragments of his corpse to be sent over. Qin Yu stopped walking. He tilted his ears and heard some strange sounds. It was like something hard was rubbing against the surface of, or what followed was a putrid stench, like a coffin that had been buried underground for many years being opened. Roar, roar, loud roar spread into his ears. Qin Yu finally saw what these things looked like, a bunch of skin and bones. In simpler terms, their flesh and blood had disappeared, leaving behind only a layer of dry skin that tightly wrapped around their bones. Their pitch-black eye sockets emitted endless cruelty and bloodthirst. They opened their mouths and roared, revealing jet-black teeth. They were sinners that had died underground. Their corpses had been corroded by a curse, and over the years they had mutated and turned into terrifying monsters. Dried bones were the most dreadful predators of flesh and blood in the mines. Even the sinners below the ground were their prey. At this time, as they smelled the scent of fresh flesh and blood from Qin Yu's body, countless dried bones rushed towards him. The terrifying aspect of dried bones lay in their indestructible bones, their astonishing speed, and their infinite strength. Besides that, they also had a most astonishing aspect. That was, they could ignore defenses to a certain degree. While they were alive, the sinners' hearts were filled with hatred and resentment. After they died, they produced a rich death energy, and they absorbed and accumulated a thick curse power. All of this piled up, causing a mutation to occur in the corpses, causing the dried bones to possess a horrifying slaughter attribute. No matter how powerful a cultivator was, if they were surrounded and killed by a horde of dried bones in the dark and narrow underground mine tunnels, unless they were strong enough to break through all methods and forcefully crush everything in their path, all that awaited them was death. But the problem was, how many people in this world possessed such strength? At the very least, Qin Yu was still far from it, but he was the Goliath sovereign, and he controlled the rare treasure of the Goliath race, the palace lantern. The curse left behind by the Goliath great shaman in the past was a great help to him. So at this time, looking at the ferocious and terrifying dried bones rushing towards him, Chinyu only lifted a hand and grasped forwards. Bang, bang, there was a dull thumping sound. It was like a giant stone was suddenly shattered to pieces by a strength that erupted from within. The dried bones that rushed forwards, although they no longer had any consciousness, their empty eye sockets still revealed a bit of astonishment. Their chests had already exploded. Their hearts, which were as shriveled as walnuts and protected by their hard ribs, had been shattered into countless pieces. Under normal circumstances, a dried bone in such a state would not have a heart, and it would not have mattered at all. But now, as the walnut hearts exploded and flowers bloomed on their chests, the flow of time around them seemed to accelerate by 10,000 times. The fingers that reached out, the jaws that were wide open, the black teeth that were exposed to the air, all of this began to rapidly disintegrate and dissipate. Although all of this took a long time to describe, it actually happened extremely quickly. As Chinyu lifted his hand, stretched it out, and grasped it, everything fell silent. There was only dust that covered the entire mine tunnel, as if it were telling him something. Deep in Chinyu's eyes, a cold light burst out. "I've caught you." He lifted a hand and pointed out a finger. In the place where the sinner leaders were gathered, the figure that grinned in the darkness could clearly feel the excitement of the dried bones. They had already found their prey and would soon complete the hunt. He never doubted this at all. The dried bones were his most powerful method and also the foundation that allowed him to obtain his current status. The bright red tongue was dazzling beneath the dim green light. It slowly licked its lips, revealing a look of excitement. According to the rules, he could directly obtain half of the prey that the dried bones caught. To be able to directly kill the black-scaled golden general, the flesh and blood of such a powerhouse was the best tonic for him. Suddenly, the bright red tongue licking the corner of her mouth and the surging greed and desire in her eyes all froze at this moment. Ah! In the darkness, there was a mournful howl, filled with endless resentment and anger. But soon, the second half of this howl was mostly filled with panic and fear. Dong! There was a dull, thumping sound on the ground. The figure in the darkness shot backwards. "Found you." The air trembled, emitting a sound of its own. Calm, killing intent circulated within. Puff! A bloody hole appeared between the eyes, piercing through the back of the head. Thick red and white blood splashed out. Chapter 1526. The sinners underground had long since been tainted and distorted, turning them into monsters that weren't human. Their brains exploding was a serious injury to them, but it wasn't fatal. But at this time, with the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground, the figure that fell into the darkness had its aura completely dissipate. A sinner leader, one of the true rulers of the filthy and evil underground kingdom, had been killed like this. A cold chill instantly struck their hearts, causing the air to freeze. If they didn't see this with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed it. But without a doubt, this was the truth. The dried bones sovereign, the most terrifying existence underground, had died. And the one who did all of this was without a doubt the owner of that voice just now. In other words, it was the golden general that they had sneered and believed would surely die. Ning Qin. Demon Eye, what happened? The big-headed man roared out from his shoulder, trying his best to remain calm. The little man angrily howled. Immediately investigate. We want to know the truth. Outwardly fierce, but inwardly cowardly. But at this time, no one laughed at the little man, because the sinner leaders were all shrouded in fear. Crossing through space, the Golden General could kill the dried bones sovereign with a single strike, but he could also kill them. Soon, a giant eyeball with countless crimson veins wrapped around it appeared in front of the sinner leaders. Hum! With a tremble, the eyeball shot out light. In the dark underground space, a picture appeared. They couldn't hear anything, but this didn't stop the sinner leaders from soaking their clothes in a cold sweat. The picture was extremely clear. This was the special ability of the Demon Eye. They could clearly see Chinyu's appearance. They saw him raise his hand, clench his fingers, and kill the overwhelming, dried-bones sovereign. Then he sneered and said something. Then he lifted a hand and pointed a finger. "Found you." This was probably the sound that came from the air shaking just now. Then there was no need to mention what happened to the dried-bones sovereign. What left the other sinner leaders feeling even more fearful was the Golden General's eyes when he killed. He looked straight ahead. He killed the dried-bones sovereign, but it also seemed as if he was covering them all. In the silence, the little man screamed, "We have no choice, or do you think that the Golden General will let us go?" Surrender, in truth. This thought had already swelled up in their minds. For the leaders of the sinners, the change in the person in charge didn't affect them much. As long as the mind wanted to operate normally and produce ores continuously, their existence was needed. As for lowering his head and embarrassing himself, he didn't even consider it. He wasn't even human anymore, so why would he care about his face? However, Mr. Littlehead's words ruthlessly shattered the fantasies in their hearts. The dry-bones sovereign king was directly killed. Straightforward and efficient. There was no room for negotiation, nor was there any chance for him to show his subservience. In truth, this was already an indication of Qin Yu's attitude. The huge mountain of flesh suddenly trembled. Layers of flesh surged up, and pairs of hidden eyes opened. "Jin Wu wants to kill us. Of course, we can't just wait to die." Countless eyes flashed with a cold light. Not to mention that Emperor Realm cultivators had no choice but to retreat when they descended into the underground. I don't think the Golden General is stronger than an Emperor Realm cultivator. Big Head's eyes flashed. "You mean to say that General Jin Wu killed the Bone Sovereign with the help of an external object?" "That's right," Rosen sneered. "This is the only and most reasonable explanation." In the darkness there was silence. The fear and terror in the eyes of the leaders of the sinners slowly dissipated. If that was the case, then General Jin Wu was still terrifying, but not to the extent of making them despair. Borrowing external force seemed terrifying, but there was a limit to it. "We need to test it," another sinner leader said in the darkness. Mr. Littlehead screamed, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's begin." Qin Yu was once again surrounded in the depths of the mine. This time a strange worm appeared. It was the polar opposite of the dried bones. The former was all skin and bones, while this worm was extremely swollen. It was like a ball of boneless fat that could twist at any angle. And their only method of attack was to get close to their prey and self-destruct with a bang. The suicidal attack seemed extremely stupid, but when they saw the crimson liquid that sprayed out sizzled and sizzled as it fell into the mine, white smoke billowed out, and the terrifying corrosive marks it left behind, they couldn't bring themselves to laugh. In the beginning, the sinners underground used these insects to mine ores. The liquid in their bodies had a terrifying corrosive ability, causing the production of the mine to increase by leaps and bounds. Later, it was used in wars. Before the territory of the sinner leaders was clearly divided, it was the nightmare of countless sinners. It was unknown how many corpses were corroded by the crimson liquid. Qin Yu frowned. With a snap of his fingers, all the worms that rushed overexploded. The crimson liquid instantly submerged them. White fog rose up, corroding a large hole in the underground mine. 3 times. The trouble Qin Yu encountered was the sinners underground. This was the first time he saw the sinners with his own eyes since he entered. They were fierce and terrifying. Compared to the border guards who showed signs of barbarism on the surface, they didn't have the appearance of a human anymore. It was as if a monster had been born from the darkness in the underground. Their crimson eyes were filled with cruelty and killing intent, and there was nothing else. They didn't know fear, and they didn't fear the aura that Qin Yu emitted. Roaring and howling, the sinners rushed over. They tried to use their corpses to submerge Qin Yu and suppress him, but in the end they failed. Bang! With a dull sound, the corpse of the last sinner exploded in front of Qin Yu. He frowned, a gloomy light in his eyes. He looked down and saw a wound on the back of his hand. This was a mark left behind by a powerful sinner just before he died. Around the wound, the flesh and blood had turned jet black. Black lines that looked like spider webs were spreading outwards. With a deep breath, Qin Yu stepped over the mountain of corpses and continued to move deeper into the mine. Then the fourth time, the fifth time, the gathered sinner leaders all paled. They never imagined that Qin Yu would possess such a terrifying thing. Luckily, the first one to attack was the Bone Sovereign. Otherwise, the one to be killed would be one of them. But fortunately, external forces would eventually be consumed. Through the images transmitted back by the demon eye, they had already come to a clear conclusion. Qin Yu's strength was weakening. Or, to be more precise, his trump cards were about to be exhausted. The sinner leaders who had been shrouded in fear and cowering like cowards suddenly revealed fierce and ferocious expressions. On their shoulders, big head and small head roared. General Jinwu is at his wit's end. It's time for you and me to send him on his way. In the naked eye, thousands of pairs of eyes surged with an icy cold light. In the darkness, thick killing intent rippled endlessly. As the rulers of the underground kingdom of sin, although they were bugs crawling in the filthy land, they were free and unfettered. It had been a long, long time since anyone had given them this feeling of fear and despair. General Jinwu had to die, and he had to die in the most miserable and terrifying way. Only then could the resentment in their hearts be slightly dispelled. Wait a moment. The sinner leader in the darkness said in a deep and fearful voice, I feel that General Jinwu isn't easy to deal with. We should wait a little longer to avoid being schemed against. The mountain of flesh fell silent. Fear and hesitation gushed out from its countless eyes. The sinner leaders had a deep hatred towards Qin Yu and an equal amount of fear. It wasn't impossible for this to be a trap that was deliberately luring them out. Whoosh, a demonic eye flew over. It shot out a beam of light that formed a picture in front of the sinner leaders. General Jinwu was retreating. Even though it was difficult to determine the direction in the mines that were as dense as a spider's web, the leader of the sinners who lived here could tell with a single glance that General Jinwu was retreating to the surface. He was running away. At this moment, all the hesitation and restlessness in the sinner leaders' hearts were swept away. We cannot let him go. If he dares to intrude into the underground world, then don't think of leaving alive. Kill him. With loud howls, the sinner leaders rushed out. In fact, they all wanted to know just what card Qin Yu had in his hands. It was actually able to cause such terrifying damage to the underground life forms. They were like chickens and dogs in front of him, unable to resist at all. If they could kill General Jinwu and seize this treasure, then from now on, this underground kingdom of sin would have a true master. Qin Yu was helpless. He discovered that the leaders of the underground sinners were far too cautious, far too steady. When he killed the dry bone sovereign, his performance could be called perfect. Although his acting skills didn't explode, he didn't make any mistakes. Now his performance was so pitiful, but the sinner leaders still hadn't done anything. Qin Yu couldn't help but regret killing Sovereign King Withered Bones a little. If he knew this would happen, he would have restrained himself a little. Shaking his head, Qin Yu swept his eyes around. He had already used his final move. If these sinner leaders didn't come, then he could only wait for him to finish what he had to do and then suppress them. But this would waste time, especially underground. The tunnels were as complex as countless overlapping cobwebs. Once the sinner leaders were frightened and tried to hide, it would be far more difficult for Qin Yu to wipe them out. At this time, as Qin Yu was retreating from the tunnel, his eyes flashed with a bright light. Then he revealed a look of relief. It wasn't easy. Using this retreat in order to advance move, he had finally hooked them. Rumble, rumble. The sound of breaking air mixed with the tremors of the tunnel flooded into his ears. Qin Yu stepped forward and took the initiative to rush over. The The sinner leaders had arrived, and he was really afraid that they would run away again. It was best to take the initiative. The sinner leaders had fierce expressions, and their eyes were filled with killing intent. Suddenly, they were scared witless. General Jinwoo had used up all his cards and was about to flee underground. So how could he still dare to rush towards them? The little head, Mr. screamed, "Don't be afraid, General Jinwoo is at the end of his tether. He is deliberately trying to trick us." He seized control of an arm and threw out the ore in his hand. "Watch as I smash him into meat paste." After the mutation, he had 2 heads and 3 arms. His talent was infinite strength. This wasn't a simple description, but true strength that could shake the heavens and shake the earth. The stone silently tore through the air. It wasn't that there was no sound, but that it was simply too fast. It was so fast that after it tore through the air, there was only a shrill sound. It was impossible to catch up. Bang! With a loud explosion, Chinyu was forced backwards. Blood tumbled in his chest. If it weren't for the fact that his mortal body had been tempered to a high enough degree, his arms would have been broken and a giant pit would have been smashed into his chest. A numbing pain swept through half his body. This feeling, it was quite refreshing. Chinyu glanced at the sinner leaders across from him. When he had killed the Bone Sovereign, he had glanced at them. It was good that they were all here. However, Chinyu's thoughts had undergone a massive change from before. The sinner leaders were still tyrannical in strength. He had personally experienced it when he caught the large stone with one hand. If he killed them like this, it would be a bit of a waste. If he could control them, that might be a good choice. Moreover, there was another point. If he really killed them all, there would be a vacuum of authority in the underground world. This would inevitably lead to struggles and unrest. This wasn't a result that Chinyu wanted to see. As the foundation of the mine, stability was the #1 priority. The production of ore couldn't be reduced. Otherwise, it would affect his chances of opening up the army. Chinyu stepped forwards. Above his head, a lantern quietly appeared. Flames quietly burned within the lantern. The light that fell down wasn't too bright, but it was enough to illuminate the figures of the many sinner leaders. Ah! Sad and shrill cries rang out. The flames of the lantern were the sinner leaders' natural enemy. Beneath the illumination of the light, their bodies began to rapidly decay. Moreover, the most horrifying point was that the sinner leaders discovered that they had lost control of the strength within their bodies. Their entire bodies had turned into wooden stakes and crushed stones. They were imprisoned where they were, unable to move in the least. Suddenly, the flames within the lantern gently flickered. The sinner leaders' pitiful screams rose up once more. Their incomparably tough bodies that were harder than iron and stone began to rot and fall to the ground. Black skeletons that had been corroded by the power of the curse were revealed. A thick aura of death and destruction completely covered them. The sinner leaders finally realized what cards General Jin held in his hands. It was just that the price of discovering the truth was far too great, so this really was a trap. Mr. Big Head screamed out, "Ah! It hurts so much. It hurts so much. General Jin, I am willing to submit to you. Don't kill me." Mr. Big Head and the other sinner leaders wished they could tear him to shreds. "Bastard, you were the one who said you wouldn't let them go. And now the first one to beg for mercy is also you." General Jin had finally managed to scheme against them. How could he let go of this chance to catch them all in one fell swoop? Begging for mercy was nothing but a dream. "Fine." A calm voice entered the sinner leader's ears. The pain and injuries brought about by the lantern's light lessened by a great deal. Chinyu's lips curved up in a smile. Light swirled in his eyes. "Give up resisting and let me leave a mark in your souls. Then you can continue to live." In the face of life and death, this was a question with no other choices. The sinner leaders who had been rescued from the brink of death tightly grasped onto the straw of hope that Chinyu had handed them. "We sinners greet General Jin." The 2-headed and 3-armed sinner leaders all knelt to the ground. Their posture was humble and respectful. The mountain of flesh wanted to cry. No matter what he did, his current form was basically the same. He could only desperately flatten himself. "General, I have no legs." Qin Yu's lips twitched. He waved his hand. "Get up." He didn't expect that the sinister-looking sinner leader in front of him would have such an outstanding talent for making jokes. "I have been ordered to guard the mine. In the future, I will hand over the production of ores to you. Remember, I don't like trouble. You must work hard." The sinner leaders let out a long sigh of relief. "Yes, General." Although they had lost their freedom and their lives were in the hands of General Jean, at least they were still alive and could retain their rights underground. Compared to a moment ago, when they were almost roasted and melted alive, this was much better. At this point, the suppression of the sinners' strike had been completed. For Qin Yu, the newly crowned emperor with the palace lantern, things were this simple. But this was originally only a side part of Qin Yu's plan. His real purpose in entering the mine this time was to find the source of the fluctuation. A sharp light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. He wanted to know what the great barbarian shaman who laid down this curse had left for him. Chapter 1527. In the deepest part of the mine, there was a huge cave. It was different from the surrounding areas that were intertwined with man-made tunnels. From the traces here, it seemed to be formed naturally. Faint traces of black fog constantly seeped out from the cave entrance, disappearing into the air. As the sinner leaders saw this from afar, their complexions paled and their eyes filled with fear. "Gulp!" The little man gulped. He said with a trembling voice, "General, you want to enter the ghost fog grotto." Qin Yu nodded. "All of you wait here." As his words fell, he stepped forwards. "You cannot." A sinner leader cried out in panic, "General, the ghost fog grotto is incomparably terrifying. For countless years, no one has ever returned after entering." The big head said, "That is indeed the case. The ghost fog grotto is incomparably terrifying. I ask General to reconsider." The sinner leaders certainly weren't. Because they were subdued by Qin Yu, they were worried about his safety. This was because Qin Yu's mark had been left in their souls, and they were bound together with him, sharing weal and woe. In simpler terms, if Qin Yu died in the ghost fog grotto, they would also be buried with him. Qin Yu's lips curved up in a cold sneer. He didn't turn his head. "I have already made up my mind. There is no need for you to say anything else." With several steps, his figure vanished from the cave entrance. "It's over." The mountain of flesh howled in grief. From within its layers of fat, pairs of eyes opened and tears of pain flowed down. They originally thought that it would be difficult for them to survive, but who would have thought that General Jean would be such a brute? Ghost Fog Grotto. This was the Ghost Fog Grotto, the most terrifying place beneath the mine. Once one entered, no one would be able to come out alive. The little man screamed, "I don't think so." He swept his eyes over the crowd. General Jin's will is extraordinary. Since he dares to rush in, he must have confidence he can escape unscathed. Although his previous actions had left them feeling disdainful, the sinner leaders still felt a little more at ease upon hearing these words. The big head slowly said, "Now you and I can only wait." Besides this, there was nothing else they could do. It would be best if General Jean came out alive. But if he died, all of them would be buried with him. As he stepped into the grotto, fog filled the air. The name Ghost Fog Grotto was quite appropriate. And the reason Qin Yu appeared here was because he had sensed an aura fluctuation. The source was here. Traces of ruthlessness gushed out from the bottom of his heart. Like tenacious vines, they gradually filled his heart and occupied his entire mind. The most terrifying thing was that the entire process was extremely abrupt. Within the fog, he could clearly feel the ruthlessness in his heart, and he could also feel it slowly increasing. His mind was restless, but he could suppress it and overcome it. Everything was still within his control. But suddenly, as if he had crossed a certain boundary. The ruthlessness that filled his heart erupted like a volcano, sweeping out in all directions. His mind fell, and his vision turned blood red. His ability to think disappeared, and all that was left was the desire to destroy. The palace lantern suddenly appeared and hung above Chinyu's head. The flames within gently danced, and the blood-red color in his eyes rapidly faded away. Chinyu regained his consciousness. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He finally understood why this place was called Ghost Mist, and why the leaders of the sinners outside were extremely terrified of this place. As the new emperor of the barbarian tribe, he did not fear the corrosion of the curse. His will was strong enough, but he had fallen into a trap unknowingly. If he did not have the palace lantern in his hand, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Of course, taking a step back, if it weren't for the palace lantern in his hand, Chinyu wouldn't have rashly stepped into this place. He would have made some preparations. Chinyu's eyes flashed, and he looked deep into the fog. The fluctuations of aura became increasingly clear. They were coming from this direction. With a thought, the dancing flames within the palace lantern suddenly brightened. At this moment, the invisible power was like flowing water, quietly spreading out. The fog that covered Chinyu was slowly pushed aside, revealing an empty area. Before this, he had suddenly fallen into a trap, causing Chinyu to feel a bit of dread. Perhaps what the barbarian great shaman had left behind in the past might not have been good intentions towards him, the new barbarian emperor. But no matter what, being a bit more cautious wouldn't go wrong. Chinyu stepped forwards, like a stream of water being pushed aside. Wherever he went, the fog would retreat. The area of this cave hidden deep underground was much larger than he had imagined, but it wasn't just that. Faintly, Chinyu could feel some weak spatial fluctuations in the fog. Although it was weak, that didn't mean it was weak. It was possible that it was a powerful concealment. Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows. This was because he discovered that the ruthlessness that had been completely crushed and expelled, ruthlessness appeared in his heart once more. As he approached, the strength hidden in the fog outside seemed to become increasingly strong. Humph! With a cold snort, the palace lantern above Chinyu's head brightened once more. In his ears, he could faintly hear a short and painful scream. A cooling sensation spread out from Xiao Chen's forehead, looking like a drop of dew. Chinyu narrowed his eyes and looked at the fog in front of him. It was much thicker and slowly flowing, like the slowly wriggling tentacles of some large mollusk. A cold light flashed in his eyes. It seemed that his worries and cautiousness weren't unnecessary. In the past, although that barbarian great shaman was a barbarian, he didn't have any good intentions towards the new emperor. He looked up at the palace lantern above his head. After a moment of hesitation, he continued forwards. Although this lantern was only an imitation of the little blue lamp, since it was the most precious inherited treasure of the barbarians, it shouldn't disappoint him. Moreover, besides this, Chinyu had other choices. Her Excellency, ruler, cough cough, it was too late to hide. Before he figured out how to explain to her about the Emperor Tomb, Chinyu didn't plan on disturbing her. The mysterious existence hidden in space-time could be considered a grasshopper on the same rope as Chinyu. Everyone had a close relationship. If there was trouble, he could look for him. Towards this mysterious existence, Chinyu didn't have a complete and clear understanding. But there was one thing without a doubt. He was strong, and not just ordinarily strong. For instance, when the human cultivators tracked him down, he was actually able to temporarily isolate him. Although, according to him, he had paid a tremendous price. But no matter how Chinyu looked at him, he was still alive and kicking without any signs of strain. In short, Chinyu had full confidence in this mysterious existence. As long as he took action, whatever ghost fog grotto, it wouldn't be difficult at all. With this thought in mind, Chinyu continued forwards. Perhaps it was because he could feel his firm thoughts. Then, after taking a few steps, The extremely dense fog in front of him suddenly disappeared. That's right, like this, they completely vanished. Chin, you could clearly see the appearance of the ghost fog grotto. It wasn't too large. To be more precise, it was much smaller than he expected. It was around 1,000 feet in size. A stone pillar shaped like a water droplet hung down from the ceiling of the grotto. There were black chains wrapped around its surface. Or it could be said that they extended out from the inside of this stone pillar. Scattered throughout the grotto, there was a dried-up corpse at the end. Their mouths were wide open, their expressions fierce and fierce. The chains had pierced through their mouths and drilled into their bodies. Although their flesh and blood were withered, one could still see the cruel and crazed expressions on the faces of these dried-up corpses. There was no pain, no fear. It was like they were the murderers and not some pitiful worm that had been killed by the chains. Chin Yu frowned for a moment before composing himself. His eyes swept over the many dried-up corpses in the grotto, and he suddenly said, "You should know that since I have come here, there is no need for you to hide." After several breaths of silence, there was a faint sigh in the grotto. "Your Majesty is right." A face appeared on the water, droplet-shaped stone pillar. Its eyes were calm and peaceful, like a calm lake without any waves. The aura of the barbarians emitted from the stone pillar. Chin Yu said, "I still don't know your name." The face hesitated for a moment and then slowly said, "Your Majesty, you can call me Lost Tracks." Chin Yu nodded. He looked into the face's eyes and said, "Great Shaman Lost Tracks, after what happened in the past, no one should have imagined that you would still be alive. It was an accident." A bitter smile appeared on Mystery Track's face. "Well, Lala." The chains that drilled into the mouths of the dried-up corpses suddenly vibrated. "Your Majesty, do you know that these chains were originally laid down to prevent accidents? I personally arranged them to suppress myself?" Chin Yu said, "It seems that Great Shaman Lost Tracks' preparations weren't sufficient." Lost Tracks was silent for several breaths of time. He nodded. "Your Majesty is right. I underestimated this place. I never thought it would possess such an astonishing strength." A bit of confusion appeared in his eyes. "Does your Majesty believe me? A dead person was actually able to come back to life. Moreover, I am well aware that I am still me." A sharp light flashed in Chin Yu's eyes. "You came back from the dead, so you don't want to die again." "Yes." Lost Track sighed. "Without personally experiencing it, no one can imagine what death is like. It is lonely, dark, and cold. After it descends, it deprives all senses and crushes all life. The world turns gray and silent, no longer related to me. That is an extremely terrifying taste." On the stone pillar, Lost Tracks looked up at Chin Yu. There was a bit of fear and guilt in his eyes, but there was also a bit of heat surging deep within. Chin Yu lightly said, "Although I have never truly experienced death, I can understand what you are saying." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Lost Tracks respectfully said. A sharp light exploded in Chin Yu's eyes. "So you can make your move now." The teardrop-shaped stone pillar gently trembled. A mass of light flew out from within. "Your Majesty, if I can live on, I will do my best to help my people restore their past glory. On the other hand, if I die once more, this mass of light will contain everything you wish to know." Chin Yu nodded. "Good." Bang, bang. Within the stone cave, dried-up corpses exploded into pieces. Countless chains howled towards him at an astonishing speed. They were like thick spider webs that wrapped around Chin Yu. In the blink of an eye, the chains wove together, turning into a giant ball as if it were a constantly wriggling, digestive organ. Outside the ghost fog cave, faint traces of fog continued to drift outwards. The two-headed, three-armed, and other sinner leaders silently waited outside, their expressions heavy. Thinking about it, no matter who it was, their life and death were tied to the shoulders of others. Moreover, the shadow of death could descend upon them at any moment. None of them would feel relaxed. 2 hours had already passed. The good news was that they were still alive. The bad news was that no one knew how long this mental torture would last. Suddenly, a divine light exploded in the big-headed's eyes. He looked up. The arm that drilled out from his chest lifted up and pointed between his eyebrows. Puff! With a dull sound, the flesh and blood between his eyebrows ruptured and dark, red blood flowed out. But there was no pain on his face. There was only confusion, as well as endless excitement and ecstasy. This wasn't an illusion. He had already determined that the mark left in his soul had disappeared. In other words, the connection between him and General Jean had been removed. Happiness came so suddenly and without reason. Even with the big-headed man's composure, he still did something that seemed like a crazy demon. He withdrew his hand and wiped away the blood on his face. He grinned and said, "We are free." Suppressed roars came from the sinners' mouths. They looked towards the entrance of the ghost fog cave, awe in their eyes as well as a bit of ridicule. Don't believe in so-called loyalty. In this world, the most reasonable thing was always the fist. Although they didn't know what had happened, there was no doubt that General Jean had died. Only like this would the mark left in their souls suddenly disappear. As for why they weren't implicated in General Jin's death, although it was strange, the most important thing was that they were able to survive and obtain freedom. Everything else wasn't important. Thank General Jean. Thank him for being an arrogant brute. Thank him for his impulsive and arrogant actions. How could a puppet that was controlled by others, whose life and death was in their hands, be compared to the free rulers of the underground kingdom? Rosen hesitated for a moment and said in a deep voice, "Should we investigate?" He was really worried, and in his heart he couldn't believe it. The powerful General Jean had died just like that. As soon as he finished speaking, he knew that he had said something stupid. As expected, the gazes of the people around him were filled with concern for the brainless adults. This was the Ghost Fog Cave. Was General Jean strong? He was a fierce character that could easily suppress all of them and control everything. It was because he wanted to go in that he died inside that they regained their freedom. Investigate? How could they investigate? Whoever went would die. Humph! Rosen coldly snorted. Pairs of eyes opened and fiercely stared at them. It was as if he was angry out of humiliation. Mr. Bighead smiled and said, "All right, today is a joyous day for you and me to regain our freedom." He cupped his hands and said, "Everyone, General Jean is dead. You and I still have things to do." Mr. Smallhead's laughter was sharp and ear-piercing. He controlled his arm and pointed above his head. "Don't forget, there are people outside waiting for our news. 1,500 women. No, I want 3,000, not one less. In addition, I want 10 times the amount of flesh and blood to compensate for our loss." In the darkness, a deep laughter sounded. "Mr. Smallhead, you are absolutely right." The sinner leaders took one last look at the entrance of the Ghost Fog Cave, which was as quiet as before. They laughed and turned to leave. General Jean was dead. This result couldn't be more wonderful. Chapter 1528. General Jinwu Ningqin had died underground. Deep in her heart, she had been eagerly waiting for this news. But when it truly came out from underground and turned into words on the jade slip, the snake woman still felt as if she was in a dream. Her many years of preparation was about to become a reality today. The strongest of the half-human barbarians, Heilin, had been killed by General Jinwu, and now General Jinwu had also died underground. There were no more obstacles in front of her. The mine would become her mine. "Come!" Snake Woman shouted in a low voice and strode outside. Since she could make preparations in the underground sinners, the other half-barbarian opponents might have made the same arrangements. If she wanted to act, the faster the better. One day later, besides the dead Heilin, the other 6 half-human barbarians guarding the mine all submitted to the Snake Woman. The jade slip that recorded the news of General Jinwu's death underground was sent out of the mine and sent to the border army camp at the fastest possible speed. Looking in the direction of the messenger, the enchanting snake woman's face flushed red. Her heart was filled with excitement. Now, she only needed to obtain the approval of the camp, and she could become the new ruler of the mine. But before that, there were still some small problems that needed to be dealt with. For example, the people that General Jinwoo had brought, as well as the little girl that had chased after them. A cold light flashed in the snake woman's eyes. Women, especially beautiful women, were hidden dangers that could not be ignored no matter where they were. The snake woman knew how she had risen step by step to where she was today. So, she would not give her other self any chance. Commander's tent. All the generals had gathered. The accounts were being discussed. Suddenly, the commander's tent was opened from the outside. A young general hurried in with a dignified expression. Wu Tongtian frowned. The war had stabilized, and the barbarians showed signs of retreating after a wave of frenzied attacks. Just what had happened. He actually wanted to interrupt the ongoing accounting discussion. Zhao Chong recognized that the one who had broken into the commander's tent was a highly regarded officer under Wu Tongtian. He smiled and returned to his seat, not showing the slightest bit of dissatisfaction. "What is it?" Wu Tongtian asked. The young general respectfully bowed. "Greetings to the commander. Greetings to the generals." He took out a jade slip and held it above his head with both hands. "An urgent report from the mine." Yi Sang-do's eyes flickered, and he revealed a cold smile. He thought to himself, here it comes. Ever since he received the news that Ning Qin had barged into the mine alone, he knew that this day would come. That boy had probably become food for the sinners in the subterranean world. Wu Tongtian reached out, and the jade slip flew into his hand. He sent his divine sense into it and withdrew it after a few breaths. His brows furrowed and his expression turned serious. He swept his eyes around the tent. A report came from the mine. General Jin Qin went underground to suppress the sinners, but he unfortunately died on the spot. It was a solid hammer. Zhao Chong lowered his head slightly. Although his face seemed slightly gloomy, he was actually sneering on the inside. The first princess had indeed sent him a message, asking him to give Ning Qin some convenience. But what happened in the imperial capital, for this border army general, wasn't a secret at all. Of course, he knew that the first princess's letter was full of reluctance and compromise. Thus, from the bottom of his heart, Zhao Chong wasn't close to Qinyu. In fact, he was quite happy to see Qinyu being pushed aside and suppressed. Now Ning Qin was dead. Disregarding everything else, the first princess could at least remove a hidden danger. Jing Chengzi was expressionless, but if one looked carefully, they would discover that this old border army general's sitting posture was a bit stiff. General Jin Qin had died. In truth, this was completely different from the outcome he had expected. But saying these things now was meaningless. As General Jin died, true Saint Bayou's fate could be imagined. This time he feared he had really misjudged. As he thought about the sky-bearing monarch in the imperial capital and the contents of the letter he had just received from the imperial capital, Jing Chengzi felt a headache coming on. Ning Qin had misled him. Wu Tongtian had a calm expression. He quietly took in everyone's expressions. General Jin died in battle underground. This commander is quite distressed. I will report this to the imperial capital and ask that General Jin be given a posthumous title. As he spoke to hear, his eyes flashed. It's just that the mine is an important place for military supplies, and there are still sinners rioting. We must arrange for a successor as soon as possible. Yi Sang stood up and said, "Marshal, may I ask who sent this news?" Wu Tongtian said, "It was a general guarding the mine." Yi Sang laughed coldly. "This general beseeches Commander to immediately descend. I implore Commander to immediately kill this general and take his head to the imperial capital." He turned and swept his eyes over everyone. General Jean Chin hasn't been in the Western Border Army for long, and his knowledge of the mine is limited. How could he recklessly charge underground and lose his life? There must be someone who instigated this matter with malicious intentions. This is why General Jean Chin died. This general must be the murderer. A trace of appreciation flashed in Wu Tongtian's eyes. Thus, in the commander's tent, all the generals participating in the discussion understood that these two were shifting the blame. General Jean Chin was someone chosen by His Majesty. He had planned to increase the authority of the imperial families in the army. But now he had just arrived, and before he could do anything, he had died a violent death underground. As the number 2 figure in the Western Border Army, what would His Majesty think? Although His Majesty's thoughts couldn't easily shake the position of the commander of the Border Army, but history had already proven that His Majesty was a person who held grudges. Being remembered by His Majesty was still an extremely dangerous thing for them. Thus, the Border Army camp needed a scapegoat, or more accurately, a scapegoat to bear His Majesty's anger for them. This was also necessary for the generals in the tent. No one wanted to leave a shadow in His Majesty's heart because of this. After all, the Western wilderness was controlled by the imperial families. If they wanted to live comfortably in the future, they had to be clear about their position. Great General Yi is right. The general guarding the mine must be the mastermind. Zhao Chong sneered as he spoke with certainty, as if he already had concrete evidence in his hands. That's right. Commander, please give the order to immediately kill that general and take his head to comfort General Jean Chin's soul in heaven. Another general said. Everyone expressed their stance. Why should they stop something that was beneficial to them? Killing a general, especially a half-human barbarian who had been corroded by the barbarian race's curse, could save them some trouble. Of course, they were happy to do so. Wu Tongtian nodded. His eyes swept across the people below and suddenly said, Jiang Qingzi, I will send you to capture and kill the mastermind. With his status as the commander of the Border Army, this sentence was the final verdict. It was a death sentence for the snake woman. What a pity. This stupid and vicious woman was still dreaming of becoming the ruler of the mine. Jiang Qingzi stood up and bowed. Yes, Commander. I will set off immediately. He turned around and left. Looking at Jiang Qingzi's back, Yi Sang's expression did not change. He glanced at Wu Tongtian and cursed him for being an old fox who didn't know how they felt about each other. Wu Tongtian wanted to use this matter to gain Jiang Qingzi's favor and increase his influence in the Border Army. This was also what Yi Sang had been trying to do. As the number 1 and number 2 figures in the Border Army, their vision was naturally higher. True Saint Baitu was a nephew favored by the Sky-Baron King, but compared to the power of the powerful families in the army, he was not even worth mentioning. No matter what the reason was for General Jean Chin's death, Jiang Qingzi, who suggested him to guard the mine, could not absolve himself from the blame. With this matter, the relationship between Jiang Qingzi and the Sky-Baron King would be shrouded in a shadow, and this would give them a chance. Yi Sang frowned. He was thinking about how to ease the relationship between him and Jiang Qingzi. After all, when Ning Qin first came to the Border Army, he had secretly used some tricks. Jiang Qingzi would definitely be dissatisfied. In the mine, Little Meaty looked at the snake woman who had broken through the door with a sneer on her face. She sighed softly with a hint of helplessness. Men capture them all. Kill anyone who dares to resist. True Saint Baitu had a dazed look on his face. He already knew that General Jean Chin had died. His heart was filled with hesitation. He was angry that Ning Qin did not listen to his advice, but he was also confused about the outside world because of his death. There was also a violent anger that came from the depths of his heart. True Saint Baitu had never told anyone that when he was with General Jean Chin, he would unconsciously feel a sense of closeness. It was as if this person was an old friend, a good friend, but now he was dead. seeing the snake woman and the others break through the door. True Saint Baitu suddenly looked up, but before he could explode, a light sigh sounded in his ears. Just tell them who you are. It was Little Meaty. She met Baitu's gaze and rolled her eyes. What are you looking at? General Jean Chin is not dead. If you resist now, you will just be throwing your life away. True Saint Baitu's eyes widened. Before he could speak, he was interrupted by her rolling her eyes even more. Then he discovered that no one else could hear Little Meaty's voice. As he thought about how Chinyu didn't hesitate to suppress the demonic sect in order to snatch her away, True Saint Baitu's heart was filled with excitement. I knew that General Jean Chin was not someone who would truly lust after beauty. There must be a reason why he did this. Perhaps there was a connection between General Jean Chin and Little Meaty that he hadn't noticed. In other words, Little Meaty's words could be trusted. True Saint Baitu took a deep breath and shouted, "Stop! My uncle is the current sky-bearing king. If you dare to touch me, you will all die." The complexions of the barbarians that rushed over changed. They turned to look behind them. The snake woman hurriedly raised her hand, her complexion uncertain. "Is this true?" True Saint Baitu sneered. "This matter isn't a secret in the border army camp. If you don't believe me, feel free to ask." The snake woman had heard of the sky-bearing king's reputation before. He came from a branch of the imperial bloodline and was deeply trusted by the desolate emperor. He was a high-level figure of the empire and held great power. If someone killed his nephew, the consequences could be imagined. The snake woman took a deep breath and revealed a smile. Her vicious face became charming and charming. Why didn't Advisor Baitu say this earlier? This is all a misunderstanding. Someone, please allow Advisor Baitu to rest. Her eyes fell on Ruru. Although her body was explosive to the extreme and possessed a soul-stealing charm, the snake woman couldn't help but feel disgusted when she saw the soft and weak face in front of her that could easily arouse a man's desire to protect. She couldn't help but feel disgust in her heart. This face should be torn apart and covered with maggots. Ruru sighed for the third time. This time, the snake woman heard her. Her eyes were soft, but the words she said were very harsh. "Sister, didn't you find it strange that I only came to the mine later? Moreover, I was escorted by someone from the marshal's tent." The snake woman's expression changed slightly. Ruru lowered her head slightly. "I'm from the demonic sect. To be more precise, I'm the adopted daughter of the night demon sect master. Of course, I'm closer to him than my own." True Saint Baitu nodded. "I can prove this." His eyes fell on the snake woman and revealed a mocking expression. "Moreover, the night demon sect master is the chief of the demonic sect and has a peak sovereign cultivation." The snake woman's pupils shrank in fear. Below the emperor realm was the peak sovereign realm. In the desolate domain, the emperor realm was a peak power that could intimidate others. The peak sovereign realm was the strongest existence one could come into contact with in the ordinary world. Just this point alone made the sovereign realm's deterrence, not below the sky-bearing kings. Ruru waved her hand. "I know you're not satisfied. Then hurry up and investigate and see if I'm right." The snake woman left in a sorry state. She gritted her teeth the whole way. She had just had a beautiful dream of becoming the ruler of the mine when she turned around and was slapped in the face. Her heart was filled with anger and resentment, but she didn't dare to turn hostile and make a rash decision in a fit of anger. She couldn't afford to offend either the sky-bearing king or the night demon sect master. "Go. Contact the border army camp and confirm whether what the two of them said is correct or not." True Saint Baitu laughed coldly as he watched the snake woman and the others leave. But before he could say anything, he suddenly shivered. "Baitu, I feel that you're the kind of person who can keep secrets and won't say much, right?" Ruru said. Her eyes were soft and her expression was gentle. She gave off an aura that said she was easy to bully. But at this moment, true Saint Baitu felt that the blood in his body was about to freeze when he met her gaze. His face quickly turned pale, and as time passed, there wasn't a trace of blood left on his face. "Ah, I'm sorry I scared you." Ruru stuck out her tongue, an apologetic expression on her face. "I'm used to it. I will pay more attention in the future." True Saint Baitu felt as if he had been fished up from the depths of an icy cold lake. He gasped for breath in great gulps. Beads of sweat covered his forehead and his clothes stuck to his body. He felt terrible to the extreme. As he looked at Ruru, there was a lingering fear in his eyes. "You don't ask what you shouldn't ask, and don't say what you shouldn't say. Just these 2 points." Ruru blinked her eyes. "Do you understand?" True Saint Baitu shivered and quickly nodded. Ruru revealed a satisfied smile. She waved her hand. "All right, you can leave." After True Saint Baitu left, she sighed. She reached out and hugged the chicken overlord that was lying at her feet. Her fair, delicate, and soft little hands gently stroked its feathers, her expression extremely leisurely. "Little chicken, you also need to be obedient. Otherwise, I'm also very good at charcoal roasted chicken or spicy diced chicken." The chicken overlord shrunk into a ball, trying its best to remain motionless. Its small eyes were filled with endless longing as it looked outwards. "Chinyu, hurry and come back. This situation, I can't handle it alone." Chapter 1529. Since the dried bone sovereign was dead, the territory he left behind would certainly be divided up. After the 2-headed, 3-armed, and other sinner leaders passed through their initial ecstasy, they soon regained their composure. The mountain of flesh was the first to speak. His deep voice revealed an unyielding will that didn't back down. "My domain isn't near the dried bone, but I still want to take a bite of this fat piece of meat." The larger the area they ruled, the higher the ore production would be and the more authority they would have when communicating with the surface. When it came to his own interests, he certainly wouldn't back down. After an intense struggle, they argued several times until their faces flushed red and their roars nearly overturned the underground stone houses. But the sinner leaders patiently endured and didn't truly turn hostile. Everyone's strength was about the same. If a conflict were to erupt, it would only benefit others. Ever since the last sinner leader destroyed his own foundation and died, this sort of foolish thing had never happened again. After the division was basically finished, there were only some small problems that could be erased with a massive amount of compensation that would soon arrive. Then it's settled. The little mister screamed, an anxious look on his face. The snake woman said that she will offer down an extremely beautiful woman. But first, she is mine and no one is allowed to steal her from me. There was a burst of laughter and the fat on his body jiggled. In this aspect, who here can compare with me? I can control dozens of them at a time. In the darkness, the sinner leaders all revealed smiles. But at this time, as if a pause button had been pressed, the underground cave suddenly quieted down. All the sinner leaders froze where they were. Their eyes widened with shock and fear, because at this moment they could clearly feel that the mark left in their souls had been restored. Ghost Fog Cave. Kacha! A light sound rang out. In the silence, it was particularly clear. Countless black chains intertwined with each other, forming a huge ball that suddenly shattered and turned into powder. Qin Yu's figure was revealed. He paused for several breaths of time and slowly opened his eyes. Light flowed within, transparent and bright. It gave off a mysterious feeling as if he could see through everything. Above Qin Yu's head, the lantern quietly floated. The light that sprinkled down bathed his body. It was like a layer of golden light had been inlaid around his body. Pa! The sphere of light floating in the air shattered and dissipated. Because Qin Yu already knew everything, there was no longer a need for it to exist. He raised his head and looked up. The face of the lost, which on the water, droplet-shaped stone pillar, had long disappeared. After a brief silence, Qin Yu said, "Great shaman bewilderment, it looks like I am the one who survived to the end." He cupped his hands and bowed. This bow was not because the lost grand shaman was strong enough, nor was it because of the harvests he obtained from this matter. Instead, as the new emperor of the Berserkers, he had acknowledged and respected great shaman Lost's attempt to go against the heavens and change the fate of the Berserkers. The front lines of the western wastelands and the western barbarians, the lands shrouded in curses, the border army camps were unable to hide. Who would have thought that all of this was just a disguise? Who would have thought that such a secret would be hidden in the depths of the earth that was covered by the boundless, terrifying curse? And this secret was right in front of Qin Yu. It was this teardrop-shaped stone pillar. Or, to be more precise, it could be called a spirit embryo raised by the heavens and the earth. It was born with the Saint Tao, and this was just its nascent state. In the endless years that followed, it continued to grow and awaken, its strength rising with it. It crossed the Saint Tao and stepped into the ruler realm. And now, the spirit embryo had the laws of space and time gathered within it. This was the reason why Qin Yu had stepped into the cave. In fact, if it weren't for the wisp of great shaman bewilderment's remnant soul being inadvertently sucked into the spirit embryo and then gradually resurrected, perhaps the spirit embryo had already given birth to true self-awareness. Then had truly come back to life. Suddenly, a subtle fluctuation spread out from within the spirit embryo. Qin Yu's complexion changed. He could clearly feel that as the lost grand shaman died, the spirit embryo had begun the process of rebirth. It happened with incredible speed. Even as the thought flashed through his mind, a weak will appeared within the spirit embryo. He could hear the sound of crying in his ears, like a new child being born into the world. This cry was filled with endless pleading. It actually had the ability to recognize the outside world. It begged, hoping that Qin Yu wouldn't do anything to stop it from forming. Qin Yu frowned for a moment before composing himself. His eyes were as clear as water, and he lifted a hand. His fingertip fell on the surface of the spirit embryo. A great tide of his divine sense instantly rumbled within. Wah! In his ears, the cry was loud and clear. It was filled with despair, unwillingness, and resentment. In the next moment, it completely dissipated. This was the initial form of consciousness. Even if it was born from the spirit embryo of the heavens and earth, it was still far too weak. It simply couldn't withstand the impact of Qin Yu's divine sense. Like this, it vanished into thin air. "I'm sorry, but this is the lucky chance of the barbarians. I cannot allow you to be born." Qin Yu lifted a hand and touched between his eyebrows. His complexion paled and his body shivered. With a light cracking sound, a crack appeared between Qin Yu's eyebrows. Radiant light surged outwards. This was the light of his own soul. Inside, wrapped in layers of light, was a soul fragment. Breaking apart the soul, even if he did it on his own initiative, was still extremely damaging. Moreover, what Qin Yu was doing now involved completely severing his source. This would cause his soul to be incomplete and a gap would appear. But this was precisely the result that Qin Yu wanted. Shwa! A cold sweat instantly poured out. Beneath the light of the soul, even more colors were reflected. Qin Yu forcefully grabbed this soul fragment and pressed it towards the spirit embryo. Without encountering any resistance, the soul fragment instantly fused into the spirit embryo. "Whew!" Qin Yu let out a deep breath. He took 2 steps back and sat down cross-legged, closing his eyes to restore his soul. One day later, Qin Yu opened his eyes. His complexion was still slightly pale. This was the blood damage caused by the splitting of his soul. It wasn't something that could be repaired in a short period of time. It would take a long time for him to slowly restore it. He looked at the spirit embryo. He could clearly feel the connection between him and it. The soul fragment that was sucked in felt pitch black, but this was normal. It was like a seed that had been buried in the ground. It needed time to grow and wait before it could break through the soil and sprout. At that time, Qin Yu could be considered to have truly grasped this spirit embryo. Even so, because the soul fragment had fused into the spirit embryo, Qin Yu could already feel its gift. Even so, because the soul fragment had fused into the spirit embryo, Qin Yu could already feel its gift. Or, to be more accurate, Qin Yu was together with the spirit embryo, sharing the nurturing of the heavens and earth. The spirit embryo was born from the heavens and earth. As time passed, it would gradually grow stronger and stronger. Now, Qin Yu had also obtained the care of the heavens and earth. And this was the key reason why he didn't hesitate to shatter his own soul and even sever his source in order to plant a soul within the spirit embryo. Now, it seemed that he had succeeded. The air trembled. The phantom of a stone pagoda appeared. Its voice trembled, revealing an unconcealable excitement. It couldn't hide its excitement and joy. "Congratulations, Master! Congratulations, Master! You have successfully planted the spirit embryo and will receive the support of the heavens and earth. Your cultivation will surely advance by leaps and bounds." Qin Yu couldn't help but smile. The stone pagoda's words revealed the entire truth. From then on, he and the spirit embryo would receive the support of the heavens and earth. Their road of cultivation would be unimpeded. In the past, great shaman Bewilderment had discovered this spirit embryo underground. This was the reason why he had desperately defended the mine. Thus, this led to a long and terrifying war between the Western Wilds and the Western Barbarians. Both sides had suffered over 1 million casualties. The Western Wilds always believed that the reason the Barbarians fought to the death was because of this mine with an astonishing amount of resources. After all, mining and weapon manufacturing had always been the Barbarians' weaknesses. But they never imagined that this was only a facade of concealment. Great Shaman Bewilderment determined that he couldn't defend the mine with his own strength. Thus, at the cost of his own destruction, he borrowed the millions of dead soldiers on the battlefield to lay down the most terrifying curse of the barbarians. His goal was to protect the secret of the spirit embryo. It was likely that before he died, he already had a certain degree of understanding towards the spirit embryo. Great Shaman Bewilderment laid down those chains in an attempt to lock down his own remnant soul. Or rather, he wanted to lock down the spirit embryo itself. As for what happened during this period of time, it was impossible to find out. Great Shaman Bewilderment's remnant soul smoothly survived and occupied the leading position of the spirit embryo. He discovered that Qin Yu was the new barbarian sovereign and deliberately released fluctuations of his aura to lead him here. This was a test for Qin Yu and also for himself. If he won in the end and controlled the spirit embryo to swallow up Qin Yu, fusing the strength of the two together, he would inevitably become the strongest barbarian sovereign in the history of the barbarians. He would truly have a chance of leading the declining barbarians to restore the glory of ancient times when the barbarians ruled over all living things. On the other hand, if he was killed, the barbarian emperor would also obtain the spirit embryo, and it would still be a fortuitous encounter that belonged to the barbarian race. As for how the barbarian sovereign would deal with the spirit embryo, that would be his own choice, and Qin Yu's choice was to split his soul and plant a soul within the spirit embryo, sharing the nourishment of the heavens and earth. This was the method he decided on after much consideration. Otherwise, if he wanted to completely possess the spirit embryo, he would have to abandon his own soul and possess it, just like the lost shaman. But doing so would cause one soul to fuse with the spirit embryo. It would take a long period of time for one to slowly grow stronger. This was very safe. Under normal circumstances, it would be very difficult to find a spirit embryo hidden underground. Back then, when the Western Barren Imperial Territory entered the underground, they returned empty-handed. That was the best proof. Qin Yu didn't have that much time. He still had many matters to attend to in the outside world, so he asked the stone pagoda and made the choice of planting a soul. There were pros and cons, but since he had already made his choice, he would not regret it. Qin Yu looked at the spirit embryo, For the following period of time, he would need to protect it. At the very least, before the soul seed sprouted, it was still very fragile. Thinking for a moment, Qin Yu turned and walked out. Pa! With a snap of his fingers, a great fog gushed out once more. It was incomparably thick and soon covered the entire cave. Fluctuations of the space and time laws were released once more, quietly fusing into the surrounding space. However, to Qin Yu, none of this could harm him in the slightest, because this place had already become his domain. The cave entrance appeared in front of him. Qin Yu didn't stop and stepped out. A sneer appeared on his lips. He stood where he was, his eyes looking down from above. Bang, bang, bang. There was the sound of people falling to their knees. 2 heads, 3 arms, mountain of flesh, and the other leaders of the sinners fell to their knees without a word, their faces pale and sweat streaming down their bodies. Chapter 1530. There was a deathly silence in the underground space. The sinner leaders were tormented, their faces filled with fear and dread. They didn't know what kind of punishment they would receive, but without a doubt, if General Jin wanted to kill them, all of them would die. This is the first time and also the last time. Just as their minds were on the verge of collapse and they couldn't bear it any longer, Qin Yu suddenly spoke up. Their eyes widened in disbelief. Then, all the sinner leaders were overjoyed as if they had escaped from death. Thank you, General. We know we were wrong and will never do it again. General's magnanimity is far from what we can compare with. I swear that I will be loyal to you in the future and will willingly go through mountains of blades and seas of fire for you. They kowtowed again and again, their voices loud and clear. Their words were sincere and sincere. Qin Yu sneered. These words were good to hear. As long as he was strong enough, these sinners wouldn't dare to do anything. Conversely, it was the same. I will go into seclusion underground for a period of time, send out a message, and have true saint by you temporarily manage the mine. Qin Yu didn't say much about the strike or the ore production. He believed that as long as these sinner leaders didn't want to die, they would know what to do. Yes, General. The sinner leaders bowed together. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. After a long time, 2 heads, 3 arms, Roshan, and the other sinner leaders wiped away their cold sweat and slowly stood up. Who? Everyone let out a long breath. They glanced at each other, bitter smiles on their faces. Their moods were like a roller coaster, rising and falling in the blink of an eye. This was the most perfect description of their current experience. The Golden General had actually come out alive. Not just that, but the feeling he gave off was even more terrifying than before. As for what exactly was terrifying, they couldn't say. They only felt that he was becoming more and more enigmatic. Suddenly, in the darkness, a sinner leader sucked in a breath of cold air. This is bad. Everyone was startled and hurriedly looked at him. This person wiped away his cold sweat. Everyone, we seem to have forgotten something. He lifted a hand and pointed upwards. 2 heads, 3 arms, Roshan, and the other sinner leaders immediately understood. Their complexions changed, revealing looks of panic. They had thought that General Jin had died and had sent out news of his death. It would definitely cause a tremor in the ground. The sinners underground had been dealing with the border guards on the surface for countless years. They were very familiar with each other. General Jin Wu had brazenly killed He Lin and seized control of the mine. After his death, those half-human barbarians guarding the border would definitely retaliate. If, because of this matter, General Jin Wu's trusted aides and family were killed, the sinner leaders sucked in a breath of cold air at the same time. They had already used up the chance to avoid death. If something were to go wrong again, they had no doubt that Jin Wu would have the courage to kill them all. Quick! Immediately send a message to the surface. Big Head's lips trembled. He hoped that those idiots hadn't done anything irredeemable. As for Qin Yu, he only said that he would go into seclusion underground and then left. No one knew where he had gone. Thus, it was naturally impossible for them to tell him what had happened. In the mine, The border army had made many attempts to deal with the barbarian curse. Although they couldn't completely resolve it, they could still temporarily isolate it by paying a certain price. Jiang Qingzi led 100 of his personal guards into the mine with a gloomy face. This old general of the border army had experienced countless battles in his life. At this moment, his heart was filled with malice, and his whole body was emitting a murderous aura. Even the half-human barbarians, who had always prided themselves on being ferocious, showed fear on their faces. Without stopping, he rushed straight into the mine's guardian department. This was the organization with the highest authority here in name. The Snake Woman had just grasped power and was currently immersed in it. She didn't want to give it up for even a moment. At this time, she just happened to be in the guardian department. She was training several half-human barbarian powerhouses that had just submitted to her. Hearing that someone had arrived from the border army camp, the Snake Woman was startled. She hurried out to greet them. Outside the gates of the guardian department, the two sides encountered each other. Seeing Jiang Qingzi, the Snake Woman's complexion changed. She didn't dare to reveal the slightest bit of charm. She stepped forwards and respectfully bowed. "Greetings, old General Jiang." Within the Western Border Army camp, the fourth-ranked general had actually personally come to the mine and even risked his life to enter. Something had happened. There must have been an accident. The Snake Woman immediately thought of General Jean, who had died underground. Cold sweat seeped out of her back. However, she couldn't understand. All the information she had received clearly indicated that the border army camp was hostile towards General Jean. Otherwise, with his noble status, there was no way he would have been sent to guard the mine. The group of half-human barbarian powerhouses also paled. They all knelt on the ground. Although the mine was at the edge of the border army, it was almost isolated and abandoned by the border army camp. But as long as the big shots of the border army wanted to, they could sweep the mine clean at any time. They had the strength to do so, and Jiang Qingzi absolutely had the qualifications to do so. Are the people who followed General Jean to the mine safe and sound? Jiang Qingzi asked in a low voice. The Snake Woman's heart relaxed. She hurriedly nodded. "Reporting to Old General. Advisor by Su and Miss Rue are safe and sound. They are resting in the cave dwelling." She secretly rejoiced that Bai Su and the others had directly revealed their identities. Otherwise, she would have been in big trouble. Jiang Qingzi's heart relaxed. True Saint Bai Su was still alive. This was already a great blessing in misfortune. Although he had stayed here for too long and had probably been corroded by the power of the curse. But it was better to be alive than dead. Jiang Qingzi's gaze fell on the Snake Woman. This old general of the border army looked old, but her eyes were like sharp arrows that could pierce through a person. "You are Shimei? You were the one who sent a message to the camp to report General Jin's death?" The Snake Woman instinctively felt uneasy. She hesitated and said, "Old General, I am Shimei. I am powerless to stop General Jin's death." As she spoke, she observed his expression. Her thoughts turned quickly, trying to find the source of the uneasiness. Jiang Qingzi sneered and directly interrupted her. "Men, take Shimei down." Behind him, several personal guards rushed out. "Old General," Shimei screamed. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Why did they take her? General Jean had gone underground on his own initiative. Even if he died there, he had brought it upon himself. Looking at the guards rushing over, she could feel the coldness in their eyes. Shimei's mind was shrouded in fear. "They want to kill me." Ah! With a loud cry, she turned around and fled. A cold light flashed in Jiang Qingzi's eyes. He lifted a hand and punched out. This old general of the border army always gave people a feeling of extreme old age. Moreover, he rarely fought in front of others. Many people didn't know just how strong he was. At this time, his fist came crashing down. It was like a collapsing mountain, instantly pressing down. He wasn't a ruler, but this fist contained the endless slaughter of his army and the terrifying slaughter energy condensed within it. Its might wasn't any weaker. Bang, Snake Woman, who had fled a certain distance away, suddenly stopped screaming. Her body was directly smashed into pieces, and only her head rolled on the ground with a gurgle. Her eyes were wide open, filled with fear and deep confusion. Even as she died, she still couldn't understand why she had been killed. Jiang Qingzi drew back his fist. His eyes swept over the shivering, half-human barbarian. He coldly said, "The mine guard, Shi Mei, conspired to assassinate General Jean. She was put on trial today and attempted to escape. I killed her on the spot. Did any of you participate in this matter?" General Jin's death was Shi Mei's plot? This lascivious hussy actually had such a trick up her sleeve? The half-human barbarians felt it was strange. But seeing that Jiang Qingzi didn't seem to have any intention of venting his anger on them, they didn't dare to hesitate. "Old General, all of this was done by Shi Mei alone. We were forced by her and had no idea at all. I asked the old general to investigate clearly." Jiang Qingzi waved his hand. A personal guard stepped forward and put away Shi Mei's head. This person bowed. Without pausing, he turned and headed straight for the main camp. In the commander's tent, he was still waiting for the head to be sent to the imperial capital along with General Wu's report. General Jean had died underground. As the commander of the border army, Wu Tongtian had to give an explanation and give the imperial capital a result. This matter could be considered to have come to an end. Even if His Majesty was dissatisfied, it was said that the imperial capital hadn't been stable recently. In addition, the will of the military had always been independent and unyielding. It wasn't that they feared the suppression of the imperial families. The greatest possibility was that His Majesty had tacitly approved of this result. Jiang Qingzi took a deep breath and suppressed these thoughts. Summon advisor Bai Su. He had to bring this nephew of the sky-bearing king away as soon as possible. As for how to repair his relationship with the sky-bearing king, he also felt a headache. "Yes, old general." Soon, True Saint Bai Su rushed over. His eyes lit up when he saw Jiang Qingzi. He bowed respectfully. "Nephew greets Uncle Jiang." There were no outsiders here, so he naturally chose a more intimate form of address. He thought back to the cold treatment and suppression he had received when he entered the border army. Then, when he entered the mine, he was shocked again and again. Shocked. True Saint Bai Su's emotions fluctuated and his eyes turned red. Jiang Qingzi thought that it was because of his own tragic experiences, and guilt rose in his heart. "Bai Su, this matter was indeed because I didn't think it through and made you suffer." He took a deep breath and then exhaled. "Don't worry, I came here today to bring you away. Although the curse of the barbarian race is terrifying, it doesn't mean that there is no way to get rid of it." True Saint Bai Su wiped the corners of his eyes and cupped his hands. "Thank you, Uncle Jiang. I am fine for now. I will wait here for General Jean to come out." Who would have thought that General Jean would die underground? Jiang Qingzi furrowed his eyebrows. He turned and looked over, his white eyebrows gently trembling. Meeting his gaze, True Saint Bai Su regained his composure. He smiled and gave him a firm nod. "Uncle Jiang, you didn't hear wrong. My general is still alive. The barbarians in the mine have made a mistake." His lips curled up in a cold sneer. "These bastards. Once General Jean comes out, they will surely suffer." At this time, he didn't know that Shi Mei had been killed. Jiang Qingzi. General Jean Ningqin hadn't died. If this was true, then what were the people in the mine? The border army camp was the real deal. They had made a huge mistake and made a joke of themselves. "Nephew Bai Su, are you speaking the truth? Do you have a way to determine whether General Jean is alive or dead?" True Saint Bai Su shook his head. Then he thought of the seemingly weak little girl in the back courtyard. Hiss! A chill suddenly surged out from the bottom of his heart. He suddenly felt that there was a gaze that seemed like a smile that wasn't a smile enveloping him. His body shivered and his face paled. He squeezed out a smile. Uncle John, don't ask any more. But I can guarantee that General Jean is still alive. He didn't doubt the words of this little girl. What nonsense. If you were in contact with her, you would also believe her. That feeling was terrifying to the extreme. General Jean had suppressed the demonic sex and snatched her to his side. Perhaps even he didn't know what kind of terrifying existence he had invited back. Jiang Qingzi looked at true Saint Baisu. He could sense the fear and unease in his eyes. He frowned and didn't ask any more questions. He didn't know that he had inadvertently avoided a disaster, because the little girl in the back courtyard was really looking over here. If he continued asking, he wouldn't be able to leave so easily. Sitting on a chair, Jiang Qingzi fell into deep thought. When he first received the news, he had lost his composure. But now that he had regained his composure, he began to seriously examine this matter. Calculating the time, Xu Mei's head shouldn't have arrived at the camp yet. In other words, the report in the commander's tent hadn't been sent to the capital yet. If Jiang Qingzi wanted to, he had a way to stop this matter. But why should he stop it? Suppressing the matter a little and watching from the sidelines might not be a bad choice. Thinking of this, Jiang Qingzi looked at true Saint Baisu. Nephew Baisu, you never mentioned what you said today to me. General Jean has indeed died underground. True Saint Baisu's eyes flashed, and he immediately understood what Jiang Qingzi was planning. Although he didn't know the specifics, thinking about how the border army camp had always been suppressing him, he revealed a cold smile. He bowed. Uncle Jiang is right. I didn't say anything, and I don't know anything. Western Wasteland Capital. Military headquarters. The war between the Western Border Army and the Western barbarians was intense, and the entire country was watching. Since it came from the Border Army camp, no one dared to delay the urgent report from the commander's tent. After it was signed, it was sent to the palace at the fastest speed possible. Holding the military report and the wooden box together, the military headquarters cultivator's forehead was covered with beads of sweat. He had worked in the military headquarters for many years and was responsible for sending military reports to the palace. He had experienced similar situations before. This wooden box likely contained a head. The front-line military commander had acted first and then sent a report to the palace. Something major must have occurred. As he thought about the rumors he heard in his daily life, his complexion paled. Jin Wu had placed Ning Qin into the Western Border Army. His Majesty's intentions were self-evident. If it was related to today's report, then if he wasn't careful, it might trigger a conflict between imperial power and military power. Even if there was only the tiniest bit of strength involved, if it affected him, he feared he would die a horrible death. Entering the imperial palace, he didn't stop until he arrived at the study. A eunuch walked out and received the military report and wooden box with both hands. The military headquarters cultivator's legs softened and he nearly fell to the ground. The eunuch looked at his distressed appearance and then at the wooden box. His expression turned dignified. He hurried into the hall. The eunuch knelt on the ground and raised his hands high. Your Majesty, the Western Border Army Camp's commander's tent has sent an urgent military report. Chapter 1531. Study Room. With the sky-bearing king in the lead, several officials frowned. Beads of sweat could be seen on their temples. The military report had been read and the wooden box was opened. There was indeed a human head inside. It was a woman. She looked quite beautiful, but no matter how beautiful a woman was, only a head was left. No one would be interested in her. His Majesty sat high above. His figure was blurry behind the bead curtains and his breathing was calm. But everyone could clearly feel the rage in His Majesty's heart. It had been many years since His Majesty had lost his composure like this. What did the military report mention? Pa! A light sound came from behind the bead curtains. The Western Wasteland Great Emperor placed the jade slip on the table. He looked up. His eyes were cold and indifferent as he looked at the officials below. Golden General Ning Qin has died. Inside the hall, the air froze and everyone stopped breathing. At this moment, they finally understood why His Majesty was so angry. Wu Tongtian, he actually had the guts to do this. Then they thought about how His Majesty had gathered them today to discuss the turmoil in the imperial capital. Several of the imperial clan's important officials all felt as if they were in a precarious situation. His Majesty must be furious. Moreover, he was even more furious because, even though he could see everything clearly, he could only choose to endure it. The imperial clans would not support a majesty who was about to abdicate and shake the stability of the military. Especially now, the struggle between imperial and military power could not be allowed to happen. Your Majesty, the sky-bearing king knelt on the ground. I am willing to go to the border army. His attitude caused the other important officials of the imperial clans in the hall to reveal looks of surprise. Then, a look of shame and admiration appeared on their faces. His Majesty was about to abdicate and hand over power. They didn't have the courage to argue with the military. Behind the bead curtains, the Western Wasteland Great Emperor's voice was calm. There is no need. General Wu has already investigated the truth and killed the mastermind. I trust in the decision and judgment of the border army general. A trace of sadness appeared in the sky-bearing king's eyes. His Majesty had backed down. In countless years, this was the first time. But since it had started, it wouldn't be the last. Perhaps this matter would be the fuse for everything. The elders of the imperial clans had already made all preparations. The abdication was unavoidable. In the end, His Majesty's plan did not come to fruition. Perhaps this was the fate that had long been decided. He and His Majesty were unwilling to accept it. They had fought for so many years, but in the end they still failed. At this moment, the eunuch who had retreated out of the hall came in with sweat on his forehead and cried, Your Majesty, urgent report from the Xinjiang border army. As the saying goes, a new emperor brings his own courtiers. This was even more accurate and realistic when it came to eunuchs. The new emperor would not continue using the old men left behind by the previous emperor. The best outcome waiting for them was to enter the secret place of the imperial palace and guard it for the rest of their lives. The more miserable ones would be exiled, and one day they would be completely purged for some unknown reason. The eunuch cursed in his heart. These border army barbarians had gone too far. They actually dared to threaten His Majesty. While he was sweating and cursing in his mind, the two military cultivators who had delivered the letter outside the imperial study were also staring at each other speechlessly. His Majesty might not casually touch the military commanders stationed at the borders, but the two of them were just insignificant ants in the military headquarters. Any random reason was enough to cause the two of them to fall into a pitiful fate. The silent weight and the torment of an unknown fate caused the robes of the two military cultivators to be soaked in a cold sweat. Their appearance became more and more distressed. After an unknown period of time, their ears began to ring and their vision became dizzy. The two of them were suddenly awakened by a burst of laughter. Their hearts shrank and they immediately revealed bewilderment. They looked at the imperial study in front of them and listened to the carefree laughter coming from within. This laughter was His Majesty. Just what was going on here? The door to the imperial study opened. The eunuch, who looked as if he had lost his parents, ran out, his face flushed and filled with pride. His Majesty has already given an official reply. Take it back and tell the old lords of the military headquarters that His Majesty's meaning is that the border armies have been increasingly negligent these past years, and it is time to reorganize them. The contents of His Majesty's imperial reply were soon spread out from the military headquarters. What followed was the entire story and the truth. The summary was as follows. In the first military memorial, General Wu of the Western Border Army reported that General Jin Qin was trapped underground in the mine to suppress the sinners' riot and strike. Unfortunately, he died on the spot. After the border army camp learned of this matter, they had already caught the culprit behind the scenes. After killing him, they would take his head and send it to the imperial capital. But it didn't take long for the second military memorial of the Western Border Army to arrive. It wasn't in the name of General Wu, but the content was quite interesting. It said that the sinners in the mine had deeply surrendered and stopped the riot. They had even handed over enough or to produce for a year. No one was stupid, especially the people in the imperial capital. The sinners had surrendered and handed over a large amount of ore. The only explanation was that General Jin Qin had suppressed them. Then the first urgent military memorial from the General Wu in the tent of the Western Border Army camp naturally became a joke. Or more accurately, it was Wu Tongtian of the Border Army who had become a joke. For a time, everyone in the streets and alleys of the imperial capital was talking about this matter before and after tea. When the famous General Wu, who had outstanding military achievements, was mentioned, they couldn't help but reveal a strange expression. Vaguely, everyone seemed to be saying that General Wu was so old that he couldn't even figure out the life and death of the generals in the army. But all this was just on the surface. Through the surface, one could see the essence. In the eyes of those who were observant, it was General Wu of the Border Army who carried out the will of a certain party to test and push His Majesty. But he was defeated and suppressed by a strong force. This caused everyone's gazes to be filled with caution and fear as they looked at the chair. The most direct consequence was that the turbulent situation in the imperial capital in recent days suddenly eased a lot. The military headquarters reprimanded the border army in all directions, and the negative example was naturally the camp of the Western Border Army. The name of Wu Tongtian was not mentioned, but everyone knew that this was a slap to General Wu. It was extremely loud. The mine resumed normal operation. No, to be more precise, it was in a state of super high efficiency. The demi-human barbarian border army stationed here had never seen the sinners underground with such a humble attitude. Therefore, they felt awe and respect from the bottom of their hearts for General Wu Jinwu, whom they had only met once and who was very strange. Although they were half-man barbarians who had been infected by the curse of the barbarians and were a different species in the border army, they still came from the army. The temperament of a soldier flowed in their bones, and soldiers always respected and admired the strong. Jiang Qingzi couldn't help laughing, shook his head, and showed a little helplessness. His plan was not like this. He should wait a little longer. But those underground sinners were really frightened by General Wu Jinwu. They didn't dare to have the slightest delay and directly sent out the ores. His arrangement was ruined. This matter couldn't be hidden. He was clear about General Wu's means. The mine seemed to be a forbidden place, and everyone in the camp avoided it, but he must have made arrangements here. The second military report in the camp must have been sent out. No matter what name was used, it was definitely not General Wu. He had been a general for many years, so he still had a deep understanding of General Wu. Counselor Baisu, since General Wu Jinwu is safe and sound, I will go back to the camp to report. General, have a safe trip. True Saint Baisu's face was full of joy. Although he believed what Miss Ro said, he was still happy to have it confirmed. More importantly, he had discovered General Wu Jinwu's secret. To others, the mine was a plague that they couldn't avoid. But in his hands, he might be able to turn it into a flower. For example, the pills that he and Tai Shi ate at the beginning, General Wu Jinwu was safe and sound when he entered the mine, and Wu Jinwu's fall today. It wasn't big, but it was a loss of face. More importantly, this matter would become a sign that General Wu Jinwu would officially gain a foothold in the Western Border Army camp. After watching Jiang Qingzi leave with his men, True Saint Baisu stood up and smiled. At this moment, he suddenly felt that the future was full of hope. The future is indeed bright and full of hope, but if someone blabbers, they might die. A serious voice sounded in his ear. True Saint Baisu's body stiffened. He turned his head with difficulty and saw Miss Ro looking at him with an extremely serious expression. She raised her hand and patted his shoulder. Little Baisu, do you understand? General Wu Jinwu is about to return. True Saint by Sue desperately nodded. Perhaps it was because the angle of distortion was wrong, but as he moved, there was a loud cracking sound. Good. Little Roan nodded with satisfaction. She held the chicken overlord in her arms and turned to walk into the residence. A chicken had popped out from her flat and round shoulder, its small eyes filled with anxiety. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out. But this didn't prevent it from transmitting the emotions in its heart. Save me, hurry and save me. True Saint by Sue was expressionless, pretending that he didn't see anything. It wasn't that he didn't want to help, but that he didn't dare to. But this didn't prevent him from experiencing the despair in the chicken overlord's heart. He had only been standing on the side, and Miss Ro had patted him on the shoulder, and he had felt as if he would die. Moreover, the chicken overlord was currently being held in her arms. The pair of fair and beautiful little hands continuously and gently stroked its feathers. Hiss! Just thinking about it made its hair stand on end. If she wanted to, then in the next moment the chicken overlord would explode into a pile of broken bones and flesh and blood splattering everywhere. General, Brother Ningqin, hurry and return. You were the one who invited this ancestor back. As for how to deal with her, that will depend on you. Deep underground in a long-abandoned mine, Qin Yu sat down cross-legged. He was like a shadow of the night, completely blending into the darkness. Qin Yu sat down cross-legged. His entire person was like the shadow of the night, completely blending into the darkness. From head to toe, there wasn't the least bit of breath left in his body. Several chubby bugs slowly crawled past Qin Yu like wriggling pieces of fat. They were called mine bugs by the sinners of the underground world. In essence, they were extremely timid creatures. If they were frightened in the slightest, they would be scared to death. With a loud bang, red corrosive magma shot out in all directions. The power was terrifying, but now it seemed that in their perception, Qin Yu was a piece of ore. A mine bug crawled onto his body. After wriggling for a moment, it found a comfortable position and soon fell asleep. In the darkness, Qin Yu's eyes opened a slit. He glanced at it, a light smile on his face. In the distance, there was still darkness that covered Qin Yu's eyes. However, in this darkness, there seemed to be a lively aura. The seed had already begun to sprout. Western Frontier Border Army Camp. Commander's tent. The meeting was held as scheduled. Wu Tongtian's expression was calm, not changing at all. At the very least, no one in the commander's tent noticed anything strange. He was still that domineering, wise, and sharp border army commander-in-chief. Yi Sang sneered inwardly. The more he appeared the same as before, the more it showed that Wu Tongtian's heart wasn't calm. As the number 2 figure of the Western Frontier Border Army, his attitude towards Wu Tongtian was a bit contradictory. He hoped that Wu Tongtian would lose face in order to increase his own influence in the border army camp. But Wu Tongtian himself was a strong supporter of the Yi family in the army. But there were some matters that he couldn't interfere with just his attitude. For instance, Wu Tongtian's loss of face was already a fact. The reprimand issued by the military was a slap to his face. In the imperial palace, His Majesty had used the prestige of trampling on Wu Tongtian to temporarily stabilize the situation and buy himself some time. But the truth was that Yi Sang wasn't optimistic about His Majesty's plans. The emperor clans ruled the western wilderness, but His Majesty, who held great power, needed to reincarnate and be replaced. This was a rule set when the western wilderness was first established, and no one could change it. Even if His Majesty was a great strategist with superb methods, so what if he could stabilize the situation for a while? In the end, there would be more and more voices and more forces that would force him to abdicate. After all, this involved everyone's interests. The meeting ended. The generals stood up and bowed, more respectful than before. They were all old foxes that had been in positions for a long time. No one wanted to be remembered by Wu Tongtian at this time. Moreover, it was just a slap to the face by His Majesty. Wu Tongtian's status was still stable. As long as he was the commander of the Western Border Army, they would never show the slightest bit of contempt or neglect. The tent quietened down. Wu Tongtian rubbed his face hard. This was a habit he had for many years to recover his energy when he was tired. A cup of brewed strong tea was placed in front of him. It was steaming hot and had a slightly bitter fragrance. The tea leaves weren't good. It was only produced by a few wild old tea trees on a barren mountain at the border. But Wu Tongtian was used to drinking it and hadn't changed it for many years. The advisor in the tent, who served the tea, smiled bitterly. He hesitated for a while and said, "Commander, should we send a memorial to the imperial palace to explain?" This was an experienced and prudent suggestion. After being reprimanded by His Majesty as an official, he had to express his attitude. Although Wu Tongtian wasn't liked by His Majesty, he had a high status. As long as he was willing to lower his head, the imperial capital would have to give him some face. For example, the shock caused by the reprimand of the border army could be quickly eliminated. Wu Tongtian drank a few mouthfuls of hot tea and shook his head. These are all minor details. His eyes were hidden in the water vapor, faintly discernible. However, they gave off an extremely deep feeling. It was like he had crossed through the barriers of space and time, falling far away. "General Jean Wu." "Ning Qin," Wu Tongtian whispered, a trace of self-deprecation in his eyes. He had to admit that he had underestimated this chess piece of the Emperor Race's army. Someone that could be chosen by His Majesty was indeed unusual. He had been too careless before. After this matter, General Jean Wu had opened up a new situation. At the very least, he had gained a firm foothold in the Western Frontier Army. After this matter, he had revealed enough potential. Even if His Majesty abdicated, the Emperor Race and its successor would fully support General Jean Wu. It could be foreseen that he would have great achievements in the future. But Wu Tongtian coldly sneered. With his understanding of His Majesty, since he was so cautious, how could a chess piece in the army not have a backup plan? General Jean Wu was destined to be a chess piece. He was now, and he would be in the future. Such a life, no matter how glorious and resplendent it was meaningless